Okay, great. The good thing about the light is that I can't see exactly you all, and I know there's a lot of you still out there after lunch. So how was lunch? Samash? I was playing around with the idea of trying to do this in French, and I gave it up in the first 5 seconds. I said I would still be here tomorrow explaining about these things. So I come from Finland. My name is Mikko, and I would like to touch on this topic of the future of design thinking by going back a bit in time. You'll see how I'll do that in a minute. And then I'd like to reflect a little bit also on the kind of foundational issues on design thinking. Well, what's out there in terms of all of this, and so on and so forth. One of the things that we have been doing at Aalto for the last 20 years, since 1995, has been taking engineers, designers, and business students at the master's level and putting them together, almost like putting them in a paper bag. Then we throw the bag around, we mix it around a little bit, and then we pour it open and see what happens. And we do that with lots of industry partners, lots of social sector partners, social enterprises, businesses, for-profit, not-for-profit. And it seems to be that we're doing something right, because we've, in a way, created a whole generation of people who somehow act as connectors. And it's an interesting phenomenon to see where they actually end up. Being a public university, we don't keep really track that much of where our students end up. And we actually are really bad at that. We suck in that area. We should know more. Anyway, we know that some of them end up in very interesting places, and we follow them and see what they do. So there's something that seems to be going right, but what we still are struggling at trying to understand what are the underpinning issues of the thing. What are actually those issues that we should really be paying attention to when we move to the next phase of this activity? Some inspirations for the presentation of today. But let me start this whole thing by introducing Doris. Doris was, unfortunately is no longer, about that long, black, hairy, ran very fast, was a lovely pig from Melanesia. And I'll get back to Doris a bit later on why do I actually want to do that. Close your eyes for a little bit. Think of yourselves on an ocean, on a sailing ship. 1771 is the year, and you're part of the crew of Captain James Cook sailing in the South Pacific. And then suddenly something starts to show a red light in the horizon. Something strange out there, and you get closer and you get closer, and you find that it's a volcano, it's an active volcano. Well, 230 years later, that volcano is still active, and this is what it looks like maybe 15 years ago. So Captain Cook was sailing around the world, in South Pacific, and finding out things. Why was he there? That's one of the key things that one wonders in this world. What on earth was he doing there? And I would suggest he was filling in the disciplinary larder. Because before this middle of the 1700s, disciplines were pretty unified, and it was the explosion in scientific knowledge that started to really drive the disciplines forwards. So he was out there. He was looking for experiences, he was looking for knowledge, he was looking for things to do, and we can have the next one. And the key thing is, we think that Captain Cook discovered Vanuatu, and then you look at the local people sitting on the mountain in the middle of the 1700s and say, hey, we've just been discovered. So, whose reality are we actually writing here? And this is something that you really need to look at in design thinking always, is whose reality are we constructing? Is it mine? Is it yours? Is it ours? How do we actually go about doing that? And what are the drivers in this? While Captain Cook was cruising around as the original yachty in the South Pacific, we kind of saw this rise of disciplines in this part of the world. The cranes, this is from the wonderful French construction industry, took it as an example here. Very sophisticated new type of technical solutions coming out in the 1700s. The beginnings of industrialization, the beginnings of certain lines of thinking that in fact somehow led to design thinking also. With also the negative sides that are actually deterring us from going further in terms of the design thinking. The rise of disciplines was an important issue, and we look at the thinking, how it has evolved, what has actually caused it to evolve, so on and so forth, and we can sort of try to understand some of the issues. Push the agenda 100 years forwards. Scientific management, by then management as a discipline had evolved quite interestingly. It had become a science. Being a management professor myself, I also am a professor in design. I kind of a bit skeptical about the management science. How can you make a science out of managing people? It's quite difficult. Anyway, people tried, and it was about how to, shall we say, organize work, how to rethink what we do, how to think about efficiencies, productivity, and blah, blah, blah. We all know that. At the same time, we also know that design emerged as a way to try to make our products better, industrialized, things like that. I'm simplifying history quite a lot here. But anyway, there was a certain marriage, a long courtship that went on, and at this end of the time we kind of say that, well, maybe that resulted in design thinking. And when we've been reflecting at Aalto on all the different issues that we know about design thinking, you know, the type of abductive reasoning, convergence, divergence, the fact that we do reflective reframing of things, the way that we think about trying to understand what users and people do and how they do things and why do they do things is really, it's an interesting phenomenon. It's a little bit here, a little bit there, lots of links to anthropology, lots of links to many other things here. So designers have always been great at borrowing from other disciplines and so on and so forth. When we really dig deeply into it, one of the sort of observations that we've been having is at the root of everything you have collaborative work. And this seems like a really sort of a self-evident issue, but we never really thought about it as a root cause, as a foundational aspect of design thinking, until it suddenly dawned on us on the coffee table that it's not really even collaborative work, it's purposeful collaborative work. There's a purpose tied to it. We do it for a reason. And that rationale, the reason ties that to the sort of the innovation discussion of doing something new which is useful and somehow successful. So we think that this kind of has driven our activities for the last years in terms of trying to understand what design thinking is and where is it going to. So, power of human collaboration. Let's jump back a bit to the story of Doris here. South Pacific. Imagine ourselves, this is anno DT, so the years before design thinking, about 20 years ago. And of course, designerly ways of thinking have been around for a very, very long time. Just look at what Nigel Cross was writing on earlier on and many other people. But then the situation was that technology had arrived, so you had outboard motors, you had cars, you had transport, you had systems of communication, you had commercial systems which were available even in the most remote corners of the islands. 80 islands, 60 inhabited, the size of a huge European country from north to south. So lots of things happening there, but there was a lot of fear of the unknown. So people had the traditions of erecting these slit drums or slit gongs at the beach landings to ward off evil spirits. And when we were looking at our tasks at that point in time there, we sometimes felt that we were part of that evil spirit gang that was invading something which was not yet ready for us. We then recognized, however, that there was a lot of things happening behind this. People were building towers, as you might know. The New Hebrides, or Vanuatu, as it is called today, is the original place of the bungee jumping, where people build towers and jump off them. It's very, very strange. I was offered the choice of going up to one of these towers. I didn't even have the guts to climb up the tower, so not even to talk about jumping off one of them. Not my ball game. I have enough risks in doing other things in life. So what were we there to do? We had been asked by the European Union to look at developing education. And this is the tenuous link that I have of this story to the public sector. If we think about what the public sector should be doing in the world today, educating citizens, or enabling learning rather, is one of the key tasks. Health is perhaps another one. Security, third one perhaps. And so I'm going to stay in the area of education. Being an academic by accident, it kind of also warms me up to talk about education. So we were there to look at how could we actually engage in developing the junior secondary school education, junior secondary level education. And so we said, okay, fine, we know a lot about this. We have our own disciplinary backgrounds from the 1750s. We've been developing disciplines. We are brought up in disciplines. We breathe disciplines. Our societies are arranged around disciplines one way or the other. And for better or the worse, we are disciplinary people. And that's why it's so difficult for us to jump out of that. And this is why it was such a cold shower for us to start to talk to people who were in some great ways pre-disciplinary or non-disciplinary, or to whom our understanding of disciplines had no meaning. The problem was that because globalization was impacting on these bunch of people in the middle of the South Pacific, they had to deal with the fact that a Russian space station was falling into the area near to them. They had to deal with the fact that you have international commerce who is using their sea routes. They had to deal with the fact that they needed skills to survive in the modern world. So there was a need to think education in their contexts. But as such, the fact that we have education which is based on disciplines didn't mean a lot to them. The skills that we have, the disciplines that we have, may not have been relevant for us. So we weren't really getting anywhere. Bringing in something from the very outside and coming in and trying to do things in a European fashion, it just didn't work. We weren't there for the first time. We were all experienced development people. We had been doing things all around the world. And so we knew all about participatory appraisals. We knew all about all that jargon that is out there previously. We weren't ready for the fact that we had non-disciplinary people meeting us. So what did we do? Remember, design thinking hadn't been invented by then. We were designers, partly ourselves and partly engineers and other people. So what did we do? We went back and we started looking at the root causes of what we had here. We had the resources. If you look at the triangles below, kind of on a minimal level. We had the financial, the human resources, the physical resources even. We also knew what we wanted to do on a wide way. So in a way, the activities, we had an idea roughly of them. We also knew what kind of products and services and business models at that point in time. We didn't use this language, of course. This has been constructed afterwards. But we kind of knew what we were wanting to achieve. What we didn't know was how to deal with the socially built constraints that actually stopped us from using our resources. Now, if we think about our life today, in very many corporate cases, in organizational cases, in terms of the public sector, it is the same constraints today that stop us from doing things. And how do we manage to go around them? So, insight number one was the role of social constraints in stopping everything, essentially. So what did we do? we knew that we had to have somebody who would interpret for us. And those of you who read Verganti and Roberto would be extremely proud of us because we're using interpreters here, except we used it 10 years before Roberto. So it was kind of an early on thing. We also needed the architects to do this thing. So we needed an interpreter who actually worked between us. We also found somebody from Ambrum, a man who was working in the whole thing with us. And we said, well, we need somebody who can push people into doing things. Ambrum is an island of black magic. And so it's great to have somebody from there coming in there. And so people are saying, okay, we don't really want to argue with the black magician here, so let's get our act on this, let's move on this thing. So we started co-creating schools with the students, with communities, interminable amount of time spent sitting under trees, talking, making sense of things, trying to understand where are we going, testing. We kind of invented lean as we went along also because we didn't have the resources to do everything that we wanted. So building up our understanding of this. So out of that exercise, we got a couple of insights. Now, I have to say, that was 15, 20 years ago, and these insights are from these days. But I think it has been necessary for us to go back to those experiences we had so that we could reflect and understand. What we were trying to do then was to move beyond our experiences and their experiences and to create a joint platform. So we were wanting to do that so that we could actually think together. So we were creating new types of concepts of schools. So this kind of concept thinking is really in the middle of this. And we borrow very liberally from Deleuze in this idea of the concept, and it's very, very useful in this kind of thing. The other big insight was that in their context, and also I think in our context, educating is becoming. It's not being something. We're not engineers necessarily. We're not this, we're not that. We are continuously becoming something. And this continuous education is perhaps one of the key things that we really need to build into our educational structures today. Going on. One important insight that we already had at that point in time is it doesn't really matter what skills we teach. Because if you teach skills, people's abilities will rise and they will meet the ceiling and they will not be able to do anything. So just as much as you need to rise people's skill levels, you need to rise the ceiling or the roof of the use of those skills so you can actually go up like that. And this socially built constraints are the biggest boogeyman in our societies today, and that is what design thinking should be focusing on in terms of resolving as we go along. Last but not least, thought on how can we model innovation, design thinking, those sort of things in terms of that. And we started to think, well, actually, it's not a tree. It's not an organized tree, which is beautiful to look at, where knowledge builds on each other. It's something which is underground. It's hidden, partly visible. It's almost like the mushrooms popping up here and there. You remove a constraint somewhere, you get some light to an area, and suddenly you find new things coming from the underground. This rhizome thinking is actually a fundamental insight that we've been having over the last few years, and we've been trying to understand how could we actually build that into education. And we've been seeing that peer-to-peer learning is very much linked to that. We have so many talented students who know a lot more about specific things than we. Let them do a lot of this thing. So what about Doris? Well, Doris was a token. Doris was a trade-off. The European Union gave us, I don't want to say how much money, but enough. But the local people gave us their time. They gave us the land, or didn't give us the land. They gave the school the land. They gave us the sand. And in a tropical island, the sand is a problem. You have to dive underwater to get it in small baskets. It's not a mean feat. We gave them construction material. We gave them some expertise, and they built their own schools. So it was a trade-off. And in reply to all of the things that we did for them and a lot of things they did for us, they gave us a pig. So that pig was a symbol of collaboration in my books. And so Doris traveled back with a boat from us, and then we had to hit a plane. And so in a rice bag, put him on the back of the plane in the cargo hold. And it was slightly embarrassing because every time we hit a bump, these small planes, you heard this boom, boom, I say, it's not my pig in the back. I don't really know whose pig it might be, but there's some pig in the back. So Doris lived a long and happy life on a farm, on my farm in the South Pacific. And at some point in time, she ran out of time. And then we had the most expensive pork chops on courtesy of the European Union. But again, I would not like to put that out into the public. So what do we have in terms of the key issue here? In these really open-ended situations where you really don't know what to do, these four elements, basically the type of rhizome thinking, the type of thinking which is related to focusing on constraints more than capabilities, the idea that we can actually create new ways of thinking about creating concepts which start to live up. They are starting to build up into a platform of thinking for us on how can we take education-related design thinking forwards. But at the bottom of that still is the key insight that, when you really don't know what you should be thinking, when you really can't make any sense of anything, then get a lot of people together and start collaborating to make sense, because that's the only thing that will take you forwards. Thank you.
My name's Lydia. I work for an organisation called ThinkPlace, which was established in Australia 10 years ago. But I'm based for them in Nairobi, and today I'd like to talk to you about design thinking and its role in the creation of public value. And I'll use an example from both Australia and Kenya. So here goes. I think the first point I want to make is that rarely do we have all the data that we need to solve problems, complex problems in our world today, especially for things that are multifaceted, things like how you manage a pandemic or how you address substance abuse in society. And to me, issues like this are where we can use design thinking quite a lot. Because to me, design thinking is a way of looking at the world where we can embrace uncertainty and ambiguity. And what you see on the screen here is the design squiggle by Damien Newman. It's usually how I feel at the beginning of any of our projects. Confused, overwhelmed, really disorganized. Should probably not be telling you all that. But I think what Damien Newman was trying to represent with his squiggle, the design squiggle, was to say that design does not try to draw out conclusions too early. It rather tolerates ambiguity, it tolerates conflicts, it tolerates different versions of the truth, as much as we don't like to admit it. And that's because reality is complex. And in my role with ThinkPlace, my job is to help our clients navigate through that complexity. We navigate through the squiggle, we learn together, we innovate together, we experiment together. And hopefully if we do that well, then we can arrive at a really powerful intervention. An intervention in the health system or the social services system or even the law and order system. And yes, design can be used for a whole bunch of different things, including public systems. So this Professor Richard Buchanan, who was, I think, the Dean of the Design School at Carnegie Mellon University in the US, back in the 90s coined this as the 4 orders of design. And he talked about how design can be applied to a lot of different challenges. I think we're all familiar with visual design and graphic design, which is, I guess, the design of signs and symbols. And that's what he called first-order design. He then talked about industrial design being the second order, where the focus is on form and function. He then talked about the advent of interaction design or service design, especially with the internet skyrocketing about 20 years ago and human-computer interaction really taking off. And then he said that his argument was that design can be applied to even more complex things than that. And we're talking about whole systems, environmental systems, social systems, and economic systems. And what I'd like to do today is talk a bit more about this fourth order design, the system level thinking. And I guess the solution to a fourth order problem can involve many different things. One example I'll use today is around how it can change the behavior of millions of people if we do it well. Or it can change perhaps a societal outcome by bringing and integrating a whole bunch of different forms of knowledge and experiences together through co-creation. So allow me to take you to where we applied design thinking for a fourth order problem very recently, and that's in Kenya, where 3/4 of the population is uninsured and they have to pay for their health services out of pocket. Now, the National Hospital Insurance Fund, the NHIF in Kenya, is the provider of the Social Health Insurance Fund and has been assigned by the government to achieve universal health coverage. That's very affordable and quality health coverage for every single Kenyan. What this means for the NHIF is that they need to grow their membership base from 2 million, as it stands today, to 24 million within 2 years. That's their political mandate. Now, for salaried employees in Kenya, being an NHIF member or contributor is compulsory, and your employer takes that money from your pay every month. Excuse me. But for the 80% of the working population that is informally employed, that contribution is voluntary. And as you can imagine, that coverage for that 80% is extremely low. And it's been low for many, many years. So we've been working with the NHIF to try to find out why people are not joining, and then when they are, why they're dropping off. To do that, we spoke to 102 people. We'd spent no less than 2 hours with each one of those people. And we spoke to current members, potential members, former members. We spoke to people in the NHIF senior management at HQ. We spoke to branch level staff in rural branches. We spoke to the accredited healthcare facilities that were, doing the service provision of the healthcare that people were signing up for. And we learnt a lot of things. So I'll just share with you a few of those things. We learnt that faith in the hospital system in Kenya, the public health system, I should say, in Kenya, was extremely low. People had witnessed others, and we heard this on several occasions, die before them, 3 or 4 people dying before them, while they waited for a doctor in a doctor's waiting room for just to get care. We learnt that some members experience discrimination. So these are paying NHIF contributors who would go to get their services at health facilities, but then the facilities would favour the cash-paying payments. And the facilities told us this themselves, that they can't stand NHIF's claims processes, and the reimbursements to get their money was a nightmare. So obviously they're only human, they said, and they're not going to really care about people who are going to cause them a headache. They told us, some people told us that the payments that they tried to make over the mobile platform was just not working. And this came up a few times. People were paying through the mobile, and they'd pay month, and then they'll need to access care. So they'll go into a hospital, and then the hospital will say, well, you're not registered, you haven't been making your payments. And we heard this quite a lot. We also saw that the branch level staff are sitting behind really fancy desks in really fancy branch offices in major towns, waiting. And we realised they're going to be waiting a while for people to come knocking on their doors. We also realised that the English-only registration form can be really intimidating Although most Kenyans can understand English, this was a real turn-off for a lot of them. And we also learnt that there were a lot of private sector options that were way more competitive than what the government was offering, but the government refused to see that way. So I hope you get an idea of the kind of complexity that we were dealing with. And what we did learn by going out to the field, we probably could not have learned through traditional statistical data. It's not the kind of thing you can induct from graphs and tables. So how do you design in this environment? I guess for us, it was about humanizing it. Any health system as a whole has thousands of parts that work together in some way, whether good or bad. These parts can be things like laws, practice guidelines, technologies, organizations, roles, information, and trying to understand how all of these come together can be really challenging if we try to do that all at once. So then we try to humanize this complexity. And I know this sounds really vague and jargony, so I'm going to try to point a camera at it and show you how we tried to do that. The first thing we did was we really focused on the user, and we asked them a lot of questions that will help us understand what drives them and what differentiates them. We created personas to help the NHIF senior management team understand that 24 million people can't be all the same. And the way you approach Teresa, the bottom there, who can afford to pay for your service but is not willing to pay because she thinks your service is lousy, is very different to the way you would approach Samuel, who is dying to join your service and thinks it's the best thing possible but cannot afford to pay. So we heard the managers tell us that this really helped them understand their members as people and not as data. And I think this is a recurring theme today. But it doesn't stop there. I think personas is a really great way to understand people. How about if we took that a step further and we tried to understand their experiences? At the end of the day, no one actually experiences the whole system, any system. We experience our own pathway through that system. And that pathway is shaped by all those numerous products and services and touch points which come together to create an experience, whether good or bad. So, we had some people that we met whose barrier was that they just heard bad things about NHIF. We heard other people who said that they couldn't find the information, others who said that they couldn't afford it. We had people saying that they had a really bad experience interacting with NHIF, and others saying that they really just couldn't stand the service they were getting at the health facilities. One story that comes to mind on this, we met a lady, and I'll call her Janice. She went to hospital one day because of her son. He was quite ill, and she had been religiously paying for years. Unfortunately, like I mentioned before, the IT system at the hospital didn't register that she had been making these payments via her mobile. Despite showing the receipts over SMS, she was still turned away. So she tried calling the contact centre, and they told her that she had to come into the head office. So the next day she woke up quite early and she made the 3-hour commute to Nairobi, to only have to wait in line for 2 hours after that before she could see someone at the counter. And the person behind the counter told her that she had to write a letter of complaint. And then that she'll have to wait for a response by mail. Meanwhile, Janice's son is still needing treatment, and she's having to pay for that out of pocket. So it's a pretty big deal when a public system lets you down. It's much bigger than if you try to buy a book on Amazon and that doesn't go wrong, or if you're trying to order food and that doesn't go right. I think the consequences are much greater than that, because it does mean that someone can make a choice not to participate in a potential system or service or offering that could benefit them and their family later on. So, how could Janice's experience be avoided? I think personally as a designer, I push for this. We need to make the experience as important as the system itself. An example I'd like to show here, and there's a lot of words on the screen, I'm not expecting anyone to read them all, but When we really tried to understand the NHIF system and people's pathways through it, what was working, what was not working, what was good, what was crappy, and there were loads of these stories that we mapped, and we turned them into journey maps like this. And we find that this is really helpful because I guess we can now identify the barriers and ask ourselves, okay, well, what's the kind of experience that we do want people to have? What can we imagine? And then we can work backwards from there and make the changes within the system to help us achieve that. I'm going to take a deep dive now. I'm sorry, this is really depressing. This is another sad story. But if you read just what's in the circle there, this is Teresa's story. And her barrier was that she had a miscarriage in January. The treatment she got at the hospital was appalling. While she was bleeding, they made me go back by myself to a private facility for scans as their machine was broken. Then I had to pay a lot with money that I did not have. I was told I would be refunded, but I wasn't. It was lucky that my friend was there to help me, otherwise I would have died waiting for NHIF to help me. And this was huge for the managers to hear and see. These types of stories really helped the managers see through the eyes of the user. So where are we at now with that project? We've co-developed with the managers at branch level and HQ 17 concepts to improve the experience of the informal sector in finding out and in experiencing NHIF. Now, this is sitting at the board, and I don't know what will happen. Maybe some will go through, some will not. And the other thing which I think is really exciting is that we've been asked to help them develop their annual work plans. So that's 120 managers that we'll be working with to develop their annual work plans based on, I guess, a place of empathy and some of the things that we found out. So I think that's really exciting because we start looking at design's role within an organisation and that sort of cultural shift and change and its role in change management. I think that's really exciting for us. So my next point is about empathy. And I can't emphasise this enough, emphasise the empathy. I'm not sure if there are many Australians in the room. I can pinpoint one. But there was a show that was made in Australia a few years ago called Go Back to Where You Came From. I highly recommend it. It was a four-part series where they got a bunch of, maybe a handful, 5 or 6 Australians that were racist-leaning, and they put them through a bit of a 1-month exercise. And they started by throwing them into a rural immigration detention centre in Australia for a few days, and they just had to find their way. And then they threw them on a boat coming from Indonesia that was a bit shabby, and it was in the middle of a storm, and they had to risk their lives, and they had to survive that. And then they threw them in some refugee camp. I think there was some in Syria and some in Kenya. And the transformation, that journey that people were able to experience and that we all got to witness was pretty tremendous, because their worldview changed in a matter of weeks in a way that would not have been possible if they were sitting, reading the paper, sipping on their coffee, in the sun by their swimming pool in their backyard. It just would not have happened. And I think this really emphasises the point about putting ourselves in people's shoes and empathising with the lived experiences of people to help us make these decisions that affect them. So, I'm running out of time, so I'm going to try to get through this other thing. So on the Australia note, let's go to Australia. For the next example, I'm going to read out some numbers. 320,000 people is the number of people living with dementia in Australia, and this number is estimated to increase to 1 million by 2050. So the government last year allocated an extra $200 million in funding for research on prevention, diagnosis, treatment and care. They asked us to help prioritise the allocation of funding to ensure that society gets a really good return on investment. Now, the issue of dementia is quite a complex one because it sits at the intersection of the global scientific system, scientific research system, the healthcare system, and the aged care provision system. And none of these systems fully account for the problems faced by people with dementia. So how do we bring the experience of people living with dementia into the national priority setting agenda? Well, we talk to them, their families, their caregivers, doctors, and researchers for multiple perspectives. And I just want to share with you some of the things we heard. We heard people say, we find it easier and cheaper to medicate people and sedate them than to manage them in a behavioural model. There is a disconnect between the funding and the promotion of independence. You are rewarded for the less a person can do. The sicker they are, the better. We are so risk avoidant that we are taking away their dignity and autonomy. And if staff enable a resident to do something for themselves, they get a serve because they are not following the care plan. Immediately after the diagnosis, people stopped talking directly to him. They didn't know how to engage. This is the last one. I'm really the same person I was right after diagnosis, but I'm not treated that way. So, some of you may already know, with dementia, there are behavioural symptoms associated with it. People wander, they get lost, they get confused, and sometimes they can even get violent. And this gets tough for them, but also for the people around them. There is a tendency to over-medicate and over-sedate to deal with this. It keeps people calm, sitting in a chair and all drugged up. But if that person decides to stand, they might feel a bit disoriented and they might even fall. So their independence is reduced. And if you have dementia, this current model of care is just the opposite of the kind of care that you actually need. But when we told researchers this, they told us, so what? We already knew that. The real problem then, we came to find out together, is actually in the translation space. So the question became, how do we get over this translation barrier? And I think it's come up a few times today about bringing voices together to build a shared vision for change, and that's what we did. We brought in, all the people that we had been speaking to, caregivers, families, researchers, medical practitioners, to be able to do that. So this is the 4 voices of design, and I'm just going to quickly go through this. I think it's really important to have the right voices in the room when you're doing co-design and when you're trying to build this shared vision for change. The voice of intent is the one that sets the direction. It exercises authority and it takes accountability for decision making. The voice of experience is focused on sort of desirability. It's based on the real and practical experiences of citizens, clients and staff. And then you've got the voice of expertise, which has sort of that expert knowledge about what is possible and viable, policy makers, legal people, tech people, ops people. And there comes in the voice of design, which brokers and synthesizes all these voices to ensure that each one is heard in the right amount. So I think for us on this project, the result was a process of authentic engagement, one that built community trust in government and shared accountability among stakeholders, because we were able to get a balanced perspective from all of these 4 voices. I do also want to say that it didn't come without its challenges. We were working with researchers who had spent the best part of their life, 30 to 40 years even, looking at the synapses of the brain through microscopes and dissecting mice and spending a lot of time in labs. And then there was us trying to get them to use sticky notes and, do designerly stuff. And it was not easy. And I think one idea that we really did, manage to get through quite well was this idea of iteration and a prototyping mindset. And we did insist that we have to get this wrong several times before we get it right. And I think by the end of it, everyone was extremely happy with it because we had gone out and tested it with other people who were not just in the core working group, to test a lot of the ideas and assumptions we were making about this new priority framework. Now, the last thing I want to do, one more thing actually. the value. $200 million spent now could have saved billions of dollars down the track, and you've got sort of a quick snapshot of the priority framework that we developed. And the last thing I want to do is introduce you to two people who I met a few years back. First person's George, and George has a tendency to fear uncertainty, avoid new experiences, and he has quite a narrow repertoire because of that. And then there's Jeff, who accepts uncertainty, seeks new experiences, and has a broad repertoire. And I guess the question I have for you all today is, who do you want to be making the decisions that affect you? This is not mine. This is definitely from Jean Littker, and I recommend that you look her up because she's amazing. Because she talks about George really focusing on understanding customers or citizens as data, and Jeff really understanding customers as people. And I think for me, this is a very clear decision to make, so I'll leave it all to you to decide who you would like to be making decisions that affect you. Thank you.
Bonjour, mesdames et messieurs, je m'appelle Roger, je suis australien. Je suis désolé, je ne parle pas français. And I'm not going to try anymore. Thank you very much to Veronique for inviting me here. It's been a wonderful day so far, and I'm learning a lot. I'm very excited to be able to share my journey with you and to share some of the experiences that we've had in Australia working with design thinking. So I am Deputy Director at the Designing Out Crime Research Centre. It was a bit of a lengthy path for me to get there. I first studied psychology in my undergraduate degree, and I worked with victims of crime in my first role in the New South Wales Public Service, counselling victims of quite serious crime, sexual assault, domestic violence, working with families of homicide victims. I spent a year as New South Wales' homicide clerk, which is not a very joyful job. That period was immensely rewarding though. I was working with people, like George, working with people, and I could see immediate impact that the government department was having in working with these people, immediate impact in helping them overcome trauma. For me though, it was a difficult job, and I was in my early 20s and probably not having the life skills that I needed to be able to make a career out of that. But I was intensely interested in working with victims of crime and working with, I guess, upstream on the prevention of crime. So I went and got a new job in the same department in the Crime Prevention Division. The Crime Prevention Division works with other government agencies, local councils, to come up with strategic approaches to preventing crime in communities. I arrived there and realised, back to Miko's point about disciplines, I didn't have the skill set to work in this sector. So whenever I change jobs, it seems I do another degree. I did a Masters of Criminology in order to work out how to be the person that I needed to be at work. So I worked there for a few years, and it was great, but I did become frustrated with the discipline area of criminology, and I became frustrated with the way we were practicing it. And I'll talk a bit more about that as I go through my presentation. It was 4 years ago and a bit that I came to the University of Technology, Sydney, working with Professor Kees Dorst, who some of you know and some of you will be familiar with, at the Designing Out Crime Research Centre. And I want to pick up the journey there. So about 7 years ago actually, I think it was 2007, the New South Wales Department of Justice, where I was working, put out a call to all of the universities in New South Wales and said, we want to establish a Designing Out Crime Research Centre. And they had a very detailed brief, as government departments are good at doing. They're good at being very specific about what they want. They didn't, so they got responses from a number of universities. The response from the University of Technology completely bucked that brief. It said, we understand what you're asking for, But what you're asking for is a research centre that will look at countermeasures, look at looking at the problem head on and just trying to solve the problem as it presents. And we know design can be used in a much broader sense. We know design can be used to understand the problem in more depth, to reframe the problem and to create new solutions. So to their credit, the New South Wales Department of Justice recognised value in that and awarded the tender to the University of Technology, Sydney. And we've been working on this ever since. So from my background in criminology and crime prevention practice, I was really used to taking on problems as they presented themselves. To me, there weren't many different types of problems. There were just problems that were given to me to solve, and I would look at the problem, do research on what other people had done to solve those problems and implement them in programs. In starting a PhD in design and working in the design area, I became aware that actually there's many different types of problems. There's well-defined and ill-defined. There's open dynamic network problems. There's, as Banny talked about before, there's complicated problems that can be broken down and understood. And then there's complex problems, which are difficult to understand in the traditional ways. So, okay, for me, that's interesting because it seems there's more than one type of problem. And actually, when we look at the literature and look at practice, there's more than one type of approach to problems. So on the left side of the screen are the problem-solving approaches that I was used to applying as a practitioner, as a graduate of 2 degrees, that was set up to work with victims of crime and in crime prevention. The dominant paradigm in criminology was the SARA model. So scan the environment for what other people have done, assess which is going to be useful in your context, apply that, and then evaluate it. And the whole crime prevention movement has been doing that since the 1970s. The other approach that I was used to using was the divide and conquer approach. So a problem presents, you break it down into small parts, and then you try and fix each of those individual parts using the existing resources that you have. Now, both of those approaches are useful and valid. The divide and conquer approach is also similar to an engineering approach, and the Babylonians thought it was pretty good because they wrote about it in 200 BC. When I talk to organisations and that's the only innovation approach they have, I go, guys, we've got 2,000 odd years of knowledge now on different ways of doing things. Let's have a look at what else is out there. So drawing on reflective practice, so the double and triple loop learning framing that Cross and Chern talked about, and other approaches. And drawing on many different approaches to form a portfolio approach to innovation. So when we look at the private sector and innovation, they invest, I think it's about 60 or 70% in incremental change. So doing what they already do better. 20 or 30% I think it is in transformational, so rethinking what their values, what their working principles are, and then a small amount in radical change. I think it's a Harvard Business Review article that shows that the return on investment is actually inverse, so the biggest return on investment comes from those radical approaches. So taking that back to crime prevention practice in New South Wales, we, at Designing Out Crime, we target radical innovation. We go for helping organisations rethink, oh, there is more French there, rethink their very purpose for being. And once they've rethought their very purpose for being, rethink their practices, how they operate, and then come up with the solutions to the problems. Now, I'm going to give 3 really quick examples soon. But this is a slide. I studied a bit of business and I worked in a business school too. This is a slide that's often used to talk about groupthink. So the notion that an organisation will just continue to use the problem-solving approaches it has always used. In the Bay of Pigs invasion, the Kennedy administration was quite new and they used the approach that had been developed by the previous administration. So they responded to a military threat with a military response. It was a disaster and almost cost us the earth, I guess. But the administration learned from that and they realised that it wasn't necessarily the response that was wrong, although it kind of was, but it was the way they solved problems. So by the time the Cuban Missile Crisis came around, the administration had been able to realise that a military threat should not be necessarily met with a military response. And the Cuban Missile Crisis was averted through diplomatic means. So that's an example of an organisation being reflective in learning. Now I want to give an example of my practice before I learnt a bit about design and design thinking. So as I said, I was working in government. There was a problem in Australia with alcohol-related violence in an entertainment district that some of you who've heard about our work will be a bit familiar with. It's a place called King's Cross. I was in government when we were trying to solve this problem, and our response was very much to look at the problems, so people getting involved in assaults and people who were drunk getting involved in assaults. And we tried to address those specific things. So we brought in laws around reducing the amount of alcohol that could be sold, reducing the availability of glassware because some people were getting hit with glasses and injured terribly. Bringing in security, so really trying to address the problems as they presented. And this is one of the solutions that we, as government, came up with. This is the drunk tank. Now, as I said, I'm kind of new to design. I've only been around learning design for 4 years, and some of my design skills are pretty bad. This is a storyboard done by me, not my 8-year-old daughter, sorry, 8-month-old daughter, although she'd probably do a better job. So in King's Cross, if you're drunk and the police see that you're drunk and they say, hey, you should go home because you're drunk, and if you refuse, they can take you down to the police station. And they can then put you in a car. I swear that's a car. I really do. And they drive you 2.5 kilometres to the nearest courthouse, where they have you assessed by a medico to ensure that you are drunk and not suffering from another illness, and then hand you over to the sheriff, who locks you in a drunk cell for 4 hours. At the end of the 4 hours, they fine you $200 and you're allowed to go home. Bit of a calculation on that, and the monetary cost to that, about $1,000 to the state. There's 8 drunk tanks, but King's Cross quite often gets about 30,000 young people out on the street on a Friday and Saturday night. So this is a rational response to part of a problem. It's an example of this kind of problem solving, but it's not an answer to the question, what can we do to prevent alcohol-related violence? If the question is, what tools can we give police to better do their job, perhaps it's an answer to that. So we need a different way of working. Because if the problem is only ever approached as if it is a crime problem, then the response can only ever be a crime response. If the problem is approached through a new frame, so a new way of looking at it, then the response can be anything. And I'll give an example of a project that we did now 6 years ago, and then 2 other examples to illustrate our method. And this example is probably one of our best examples of radical innovation within an organisation. So the organisation that we worked with was the City of Sydney. They're the local government authority that manages King's Cross, as well as a number of government agencies. Their approach had been to treat this as a crime problem. They had a unit within their organisation called the Safe Cities Unit, and it was their job to come up with strategies to prevent the opportunities for crime. Now, in working with them, this is my team and my network of people that I work with in Sydney. We're multidisciplinary. So in working with the City of Sydney, we have architects, we have urban planners, computer scientists, historians, industrial designers. So in working with the City of Sydney, we have all of these disciplines to draw on. And we do it in a collaborative way. So we do it in workshops. This is a picture of a workshop that we had a few years ago to form the most recent brief that we did on King's Cross. And it's just an example of finding a neutral space, so bringing the organisations together who've been probably at loggerheads for years, But every time they meet about this issue, they have their organisational hat on and they're flying their organisational flag, defending their position around the problem. So bringing them to a neutral territory like this around a design methodology helped us really humanise the situation. We work in probably 3 ways. This is our operating model. When we have a problem, we do a research stage, we initiate the project with events, we do frame creation, then design exploration, business design, and then hand it over into a delivery stream and handover. So how we do that is informed very much by Professor Kees Dorst and his frame creation methodology. But as I said, we're a multidisciplinary team. At our peak, there's about 12 or 14 of us. We'd worked together for about 2 years as a multidisciplinary team. And as a manager, it was very difficult for me to understand what the strengths were of those many different disciplines. I don't know a lot about architecture, don't know a lot about industrial design. Nevertheless, we worked together for 2 years. After 2 years, we kind of realised that, all right, we're still multidisciplinary. We're still just doing what we're good at individually. And yes, we're uniting around this frame innovation model. But actually, what are we doing? What are our practices? So we looked back at all of the projects we've done and broke each project down into methods. So we identified which methods we'd used on each project and created method cards, a lot like the IDEO method cards, inspired by them. So each card has the person who's brought that methodology to the centre. It has advice on why you would use it, where you would use it in the project and when. So this card here is a history of past attempts. It comes from our historian and it gives a case study where it's been used and advice on when it can be used. If you put them together in a shape, you can map out a project, map out the research project. And that's really handy when working with clients and partners who are used to just following a linear approach. This has 4 sides, so you can go off on tangents. And it's a device that enables you to have that conversation with them. They also fly, so please pay attention, otherwise you'll get hit. If you catch one of these, pass it around and just get a bit of a feel for what they are. I think the best thing about these cards are that they fly in a very unpredictable manner. But it gave us as a team the opportunity to value each other's skills and reform around the frame creation methodology. So this is Professor Dorst's book. It's recently published through MIT Press and it details a lot of our case studies and the thinking behind it. But really quickly, the methodology is the result of years of research into, or drawing on design research and research into expert problem solving. Now, in his research, Professor Dorst found that the top designers really follow a pattern of behaviour. They don't try to solve the problem immediately as it presents. Rather, they take in archaeology. They ask the question, what's been tried before and to what extent has that been successful? They then ask, what makes this problem so hard to solve? Who has been involved? Who could be involved? What are the themes? And this is the really important part. What are the commonly held values amongst the organisations involved and amongst the users and the people? How create new frames from those themes. Then the future step is a design exploration, showing how that frame might be implemented. Transformation, implementing it, and integration, making this part of the problem-solving toolkit. Here's the long-awaited example. This is a bit of our workshop methodology. So in the King's Cross Hotel a couple of years ago, we brought together police, local council, residents, partygoers, and we talked to them about the problem. And we asked the question, who has been involved in the problem? So City of Sydney venue owners, taxis, patrons. Who could be involved? The media could be involved. The general public could be involved. The music industry could be involved. So if all of these people could be involved, what's important to them? And not what's important to them in relation to the problem, because if we ask that question, we're only designing from the problem. But what's important to them as an organisation? What gets their people who come to work every day out of bed in the morning? If they're user groups, what's important to them as users? So For example, the music industry are interested in performance, they're interested in audience. The patrons are interested in blowing off steam, having accessibility, having fun. We use that as data, as in the previous presentation, but data not in a numerical sense, but in a let's get to a deeper meaning. So we take those concepts and cluster them into like clusters. So fun, experience, vibrancy. And we ask the question, what does that mean? What does that mean? Fun, experience, vibrancy, friends, diversity. We think that in the context of King's Cross, that probably means something like identity forming. But we don't leave it there. We're not experts in identity forming, so we go and talk to people who know a bit about identity forming, or we tell personal stories about when we formed identity, or we read a novel, or share crappy YouTube clips of 80s music, or poems, or whatever, and come back together and ask the question again, do we still think it's about identity forming, or is it about something else? And in this case, we thought it was also about a rite of passage. So the young people in King's Cross, they're not going there to commit crime, they're going there as part of a journey in their life, part of a growing up experience. So on the left column, we have the old problem frame, alcohol-related crime, and we have the old solution frame, crime prevention. On the right, if we try to create an experience that is about identity and vibrancy, a rite of passage, we ask the question, who's good at providing a rite of passage experience? Who's good at bringing 30,000 young people together for that kind of experience? And the answer, of course, is music festivals. So if we treat this inner suburban area as a music festival, what are some of the things that we can do? At this point, we hand it over to our wonderful design students to do a design exploration. And yeah, please. And they do a 3D render. Yep. So in King's Cross, 30,000 young people out there. There's only 2 public toilets in King's Cross. So let's think about bringing in some portable urinals to reduce the street urination. A music festival also has bump in and bump out transport. It has crowd control. Crowd control is very different to security. It's a different skill set. It's a different frame. A diversity of experiences that don't just rely on alcohol. And really trying to create something, not lock things down. So coming out of this work that we did a number of years ago now was the Open Sydney policy. Open Sydney is the Sydney City's policy. It's got 200 action items. Coming out of this was also them establishing a nighttime economy team within their organisation. So a transformation at that organisational level around working principles. And then the 200 action items. 2 other really quick examples. This is a maximum security prison. I've never been there yet. This is a classroom within the maximum security prison. The former Commissioner of Corrections in New South Wales had worked his way up to the level of Commissioner from being a prison guard. A wonderful story of achievement. But he'd also taken some pretty strong views about what prison was for to that role. So these were the education facilities for prisons. The new Commissioner had a different vision. The new Commissioner wanted it not to be about security and punishment, but to be about rehabilitation through education. Now, unfortunately, there weren't the purpose-built classrooms that were needed for adult learning. So this is part of the team. On the bottom right is Rowan Lulham, the project director of this project. Douglas Tompkin, Kevin Bradley, and Tasman Munro is off. I think he took the photo. But we brought together the Commissioner's office. We brought together the teachers, the security, all of the parties within the corrective services organisation that had been at loggerheads around this issue and unable to form a good brief. And we put them through a design thinking process. We talked to prisoners. We got to understand what they wanted. What they really wanted deep down, after quite a bit of analysis and talking with them, was connection and reforming an identity. And it wasn't going to be achieved just through a classroom. It would be achieved through a learning pathway. So what are the steps on that pathway? We then co-designed and built the new classrooms with prisoners in another jail. This is it being craned in over the walls. No one escaped on the way out after this, I'm told. This is the outdoor area for them to sit as part of their lessons and learning. And this is indoor. The tables are designed specifically so that they can't be put in straight rows. They have to be used in a collaborative setup. And I don't have pictures of people in there, but there's evidence that they are. They're growing tomatoes and enjoying the space. So the first 2 cohorts have been through in that. That project is now almost 2 years old, but the first 2 cohorts of learners have been through there. I'll skip this. So back to me. This is me about a year ago leading a workshop with the victim services, so where I started in the public service. We were asked by the Secretary of the Department and the Deputy Secretary of the Department and the Commissioner to lead a transformation workshop, bringing together a bunch of stakeholders of victims of crime. So we did it, this is our studio, we did it using some of the tools that I've already shown, but the most important thing there was to get a diverse range of people around. So we had victims advocates, we had people from the justice system. And for me, this was, I guess, full circle, because I'd left victim services feeling unable to actually help anymore. I'd gone to criminology to try and find out what the answers were. I realised that they had some answers, but they didn't have all the answers. So I'd gone then to design to find different ways of solving problems. And it was a great honour to lead this workshop with my colleagues using lots of poster notes. This is part of the report that's just been published by the government. So coming out of that one-day workshop and then a couple of months of work with the department, we have 6 initiatives, 6 solution directions that I hope will be involved in prototyping and developing. So improving the court experience for victims of crime through to judicial education. The future, I think, is pretty bright. I think the most important things for us have been the mix of practice, research and education. In a university setting, having that mix is really key. Also, being partners with a government organisation and them integrating design thinking into their innovation portfolio has been a wonderful opportunity for us to do research in this field. So I look forward to seeing you next time and showing you more results on this work and other work, and I look forward to the rest of the day. Mes amis, merci.
À toutes et à tous. Tout d'abord, je voulais remercier Véronique de m'avoir invitée à participer à cette journée. Je pense qu'elle est pour nous tous l'opportunité d'être inspirés et d'en apprendre beaucoup sur l'utilisation du design thinking à travers le monde. Alors, je voudrais qu'on commence par un petit exercice à faire ensemble. Je voudrais vous demander de penser à une chose qui vous a inspiré ou que vous avez apprise et que vous pensez pouvoir mettre en pratique dans les quelques semaines qui viennent. Pour ma part, j'ai déjà repéré la présentation d'Envy. Mon mari est auditeur énergétique et je pense que je vais l'encourager à adopter cette méthode très rapidement. Alors, est-ce qu'on a tous quelque chose? Oui? Bien, on va y revenir assez rapidement. Donc, je m'appelle Estelle et je travaille à Sydney pour l'Agence pour l'innovation clinique, qui est une agence formée par le ministère de la Santé dans la région de New South Wales, donc la région de Sydney, et dont le mandat est d'accompagner l'ensemble du secteur public de santé dans le développement de nouvelles méthodes de prise en charge qui sont plus efficaces et qui répondent aux besoins du système, mais avant tout des patients. Nous avons plusieurs programmes au sein de cette agence. Et aujourd'hui, je suis là pour vous présenter la formation en redesign, qui est le programme que j'ai le plaisir de gérer. Cette formation a été créée il y a à peu près 7 ans, lorsque nous nous sommes rendus compte que pour résoudre nos problèmes, nous faisions souvent appel à des consultants, qui sont certes très compétents, mais aussi très chers. qu'on ne pouvait pas continuer comme ça très longtemps. Et donc, on a décidé de développer nos propres compétences au sein de notre système de santé. Donc, qu'est-ce que le redesign? Pour moi, j'aime le comparer à un moment qui est clé dans le quotidien, en tout cas dans mon quotidien, c'est l'apéro. Alors, pourquoi l'apéro? Quand vous prenez un apéro, vous avez les petits fours, les petites tomates, les olives, et puis chacun se sert un peu de ce qu'il veut, dans un objectif unique qui est celui d'avoir une excellente expérience, de passer une bonne soirée. Donc le redesign se base sur les piliers de plusieurs méthodologies, dont le design thinking, bien évidemment, sinon je pense que je ne serais pas là, mais aussi Lean Six Sigma, donc réduire le gaspillage et réduire les variations d'un processus, est accompagné de formation à la gestion de projet et à la conduite du changement. Notre objectif avec cette formation, c'est d'exposer nos participants, donc divers staffs du système hospitalier, à plusieurs outils, plusieurs méthodologies, pour qu'ils puissent ensuite sélectionner ceux qui leur semblent les plus pertinents pour résoudre leurs problèmes, dans un objectif unique qui est de développer un système plus efficace et une excellente expérience pour le staff et pour les patients. Alors, je voulais vous parler de ce programme et vous en parler à plusieurs niveaux. Tout d'abord, comment est-ce qu'il est structuré pour permettre un excellent apprentissage au niveau individuel. Ensuite, comment il s'inscrit dans une démarche organisationnelle et quelle en est la valeur ajoutée. Et enfin, comment est-ce qu'au niveau de l'État, en ayant adopté le redesign, nous avons pu faire de grands changements. Alors, commençons par le début. À quoi ressemble notre formation? Eh bien, voilà un diagramme de plus pour ajouter à la collection de mains que j'ai ce matin. Nous commençons par l'initiation, donc mettre en place un projet. Ensuite, un diagnostic, comprendre l'existant et les problématiques de nos patients et de nos staffs, avant de développer des solutions innovantes, planifier leur implémentation et l'évaluation. Donc, chacun de ces 5 blocs de 2 ou 3 jours de formation sont en fait séparés par 4 à 6 semaines où les participants vont mettre en place les connaissances de chacun de ces blocs sur un réel projet. Donc, pourquoi une dimension pratique aussi importante? Ou bien on sait que si vous écoutez un cours et que vous n'en faites pas grand-chose après, vous allez en retenir à peu près 10%. Alors que si vous mettez en pratique ce que vous apprenez, vous pouvez en retenir jusqu'à 80%. Donc le retour sur investissement de notre formation est vraiment dans la dimension pratique. Et alors, qu'est-ce qui se passe après cette formation? Bien, voilà l'échelle du temps qui suit aussi un peu l'émotion, l'échelle émotionnelle, si j'ose dire, des participants, des chefs de projet. Dans notre cas, mais je pense que c'est à peu près partout pareil. Donc on commence assez haut avec une équipe qui est très soudée, motivée. Oui, on va mettre en place quelque chose de nouveau, ça va être super. Et puis au moment où il faut mettre les choses en pratique, revoir la façon dont on travaille, prendre des nouvelles responsabilités, ben, notre chef de projet se retrouve plutôt seul, à cogner sa tête contre les murs et à se dire « je croyais que c'était cool au début en fait, mais maintenant je me retrouve un peu seule ». Donc nous continuons à encadrer nos responsables de projet pendant la phase de mise en pratique via des téléconférences et de nombreux entretiens pour qu'ils puissent atteindre leurs résultats qui présenteront ensuite lors d'une cérémonie de remise des diplômes. Et ces résultats sont assez souvent impressionnants. Donc je voulais vous présenter ici l'histoire de Cassie. Cassie qui était avec nous il y a à peine 2 ans, qui a commencé le programme en nous présentant son problème, en disant voilà, donc je suis Cassie, je travaille dans un hôpital pédiatrique, dans un service de santé mentale. Et notre problème, c'est que lorsqu'un patient arrive avec un problème de santé mentale, qui va le prendre en charge? Est-ce que c'est l'urgentiste, parce qu'il est là? Ou est-ce que c'est le psychiatre parce que c'est sa spécialité. Bonne question. Le problème, c'est que lorsque les chefs de service s'entendent comme ça, eh bien, c'est souvent le patient qui en pâtit avec des durées d'attente très longues qui peuvent être jusqu'à 6 heures avant que quelqu'un s'occupe de vous. Alors, je vais vous demander d'imaginer là que vous venez de retrouver votre ado qui a fait une tentative de suicide et vous l'emmenez aux urgences. Je pense que vous ne vous sentez pas très bien. Vous arrivez aux urgences et vous attendez 6 heures que quelqu'un daigne s'occuper de vous. Vous sentez l'anxiété monter? C'est évidemment pas l'expérience que vous souhaitez avoir comme utilisateur de nos services de santé et ce n'est pas l'expérience que l'on souhaite à nos patients. Alors, qu'a fait Cassie pour résoudre ce problème? Elle a suivi notre programme Appliquer la méthodologie et surtout, au lieu d'essayer de combattre les intérêts de médecins et de faire face à l'intérêt des autres médecins, elle a juste tout recentré sur l'intérêt du patient. Et grâce à cela, elle a réussi à rétablir la collaboration entre les différentes équipes, à redéfinir les modes de prise en charge et à réduire considérablement le temps total de prise en charge des patients qui, même les journées les plus, où il y a le plus de monde, atteignent 50% de réduction. Ce sont quand même d'excellents résultats et Cassie a été félicitée lors de sa remise des diplômes par le ministre de Santé mentale que vous voyez ici, car c'est pour nous un domaine qui nous tient vraiment à cœur de nous occuper de ces patients. Alors, qu'est-ce qui a permis à Cassie de réussir? Bien, évidemment, la structure de notre formation qui est très pratique, mais aussi le fait que ça s'inscrive dans une démarche organisationnelle. Alors, qu'est-ce que j'attends par une démarche organisationnelle? Tout d'abord, la sélection d'un projet. Tous les participants qui intègrent notre formation doivent venir avec un réel projet ou une réelle problématique qu'ils doivent résoudre. Et ce projet doit représenter un enjeu stratégique pour leur organisation. Du coup, ça les pousse vraiment à mettre en pratique au maximum leurs connaissances, et pas seulement même les connaissances de notre programme, parce que Cassie me disait l'autre jour au téléphone qu'elle était contente d'avoir étudié la psychologie avant, ça l'a beaucoup aidée aussi dans la mise en place de son projet. Le deuxième élément, c'est le coach. L'Agence pour l'innovation clinique finance dans chacun des Local Health Districts, donc sont l'équivalent des agences régionales de santé en France, 1 ou 2 coachs, dont le rôle est de travailler avec les équipes de direction pour identifier les projets stratégiques à mettre en place et ensuite d'accompagner les différents chefs de projet, de les aider dans la sélection et l'utilisation des différents outils et méthodologies et de les motiver jusqu'à l'atteinte des résultats pour être sûr qu'on arrive vraiment à changer la façon dont nous travaillons. Et enfin, le troisième élément, qui est vraiment aussi, je pense, le plus important, c'est le sponsor. Alors, nous appelons sponsor les personnes qui sont les plus haut placées dans la hiérarchie et qui ont vraiment le pouvoir de faire que les choses se passent. Dans le passé, ce qui arrivait, c'était qu'un directeur avait une problématique, allait trouver quelqu'un en qui il lui faisait confiance et disait ben voilà, je te confie ce projet, je sais que tu en es capable, bonne chance, et puis reviens me voir quand tu as les résultats. Je pense que pour certains d'entre vous, vous trouvez dans ou bien dans le rôle du sponsor, ou bien avec ce projet. Cependant, le rôle du sponsor est vraiment crucial pour être sûr que les changements soient mis en place, car ils sont les seuls à avoir l'autorité nécessaire que n'a pas forcément un responsable de projet. Donc, pour être sûr qu'ils soient vraiment impliqués dans le programme, eh bien, ils en font partie. Du coup, ils doivent venir avec les participants au début pour définir les projets, définir les objectifs, les ressources et la gouvernance du projet. Et ils reviennent plus tard lors de la planification de la mise en place pour revoir les rôles et responsabilités des différentes personnes. Et le fait qu'on ait vraiment ici une implication de l'ensemble de l'organisation fait que les différents hôpitaux, les différents local health districts, ont ensuite tendance à intégrer cette méthodologie du redesign dans leur démarche d'innovation et dans leur démarche d'amélioration continue. Et c'est là qu'est vraiment la valeur ajoutée de notre programme. C'est qu'ils continuent ensuite à opérer avec ces méthodes. Et en voilà un bon exemple, c'est l'exemple de Peter. Donc Peter a été diplômé il y a 2 ans avec son équipe ici. Et ce qui s'est passé pour lui, c'est qu'il a été ensuite sélectionné par son ancien sponsor avec lequel il avait conduit le projet pour gérer un nouveau projet de plus grande envergure. Donc Peter est aujourd'hui en charge du redéveloppement d'un hôpital dans la banlieue de Sydney. Et lorsque j'en parlais avec lui il y a à peu près 2 semaines pour préparer cette présentation, il me disait que vraiment cette formation a transformé sa façon de travailler, complètement. Il a été touché par cette façon de travailler qui n'est pas vraiment notre façon de travailler traditionnellement, de vraiment inclure les patients. Vous savez, souvent dans le secteur de santé, on a tendance à penser que le patient il est faible, il n'a pas son mot à dire, et puis nous, on est l'équipe soignante, et bon, c'est ce qu'on fait. Donc, on n'a qu'à le faire, le design, puisqu'on sait ce qu'on fait. Mais alors, voilà, Peter a changé complètement ses pratiques, a été très proche de ses patients pendant tout le long des décisions, en fait, pour reconstruire cet hôpital. Il les a même intégrés à son équipe projet. Donc, dans son équipe projet, on trouve 50% de personnes qui ont fait redesign auparavant, d'autres experts de l'hôpital et des patients. Et voilà ce que ça a donné. Ici, vous pouvez voir une chambre qui a été designée donc avec les besoins et les souhaits des patients, et qui comprend à l'arrière un espace qui est dédié à la famille et aux amis pour qu'on puisse apporter à un patient non seulement les besoins médicaux dont ils ont besoin, mais aussi le support émotionnel qui est très important lors de ces difficiles moments à vivre. La deuxième idée, ou le deuxième projet qui a été géré avec les patients, c'est le café chimio. Donc, traditionnellement, lorsque vous recevez votre cycle de chimio, vous êtes assis dans un fauteuil qui ne bouge pas. Et puis, vous êtes là pendant un certain nombre d'heures à ne parler à personne, juste à regarder en face de vous pendant assez longtemps. C'est déjà un moment qui est difficile. Mais grâce à cette nouvelle idée, voilà, nous avons un environnement qui est beaucoup plus flexible, beaucoup plus sociable, où les patients peuvent aller et venir à leur guise, discuter avec d'autres patients, discuter avec leurs proches, dans un cadre beaucoup plus sympathique et beaucoup moins clinique. Donc on voit ici vraiment qu'à plus grande échelle, les bénéfices du design thinking et de ce qui est à l'origine une formation sont bien plus diffusés dans l'organisation. Et d'ailleurs, nous les avons aussi adoptés au niveau de l'État. Et donc, beaucoup de projets de redesign sont gérés par notre organisation ou bien par le ministère. Alors, voici un exemple de projet qui a été mené à bien récemment et qui vise les populations aborigènes en Australie. Sachez que si vous étiez aborigène en Australie, vous auriez 60% de risque d'être en surpoids ou obèse, 3 fois plus de chances d'être diabétique que la population non aborigène, et votre espérance de vie serait réduite d'à peu près 10 ans, principalement à cause de maladies chroniques que nous pourrions éviter. La façon traditionnelle de lutter contre ces problèmes, c'est l'éducation des patients. Mais voilà, si on consacre vraiment du temps à comprendre ces populations, on découvre qu'en plus, le niveau de motivation individuelle est encore plus bas que dans les populations non aborigènes, mais par contre, qu'ils ont un esprit communautaire très, très, très développé. Alors, au lieu d'adopter l'approche traditionnelle, l'approche qui a été adoptée est celle d'un challenge collectif qui se vit en communauté. Et ce challenge est d'adopter une meilleure hygiène de vie, de faire du sport et de perdre du poids. Donc les personnes s'inscrivent en équipe communautaire et travaillent ensemble pour un objectif commun. Et donc en à peu près 3 ans, ce programme a été mis en place il y a à peu près 3 ans, on a déjà eu plus de 2000 participants qui partaient avec un poids de départ de plus de 100 kg et qui ont perdu chaque année 5% de leur masse de départ, ce qui est suffisamment significatif pour réduire les risques de maladies chroniques. Et si vous êtes encore sceptique sur l'obtention de résultats concrets, voilà en plus que nous avons obtenu au niveau de l'État depuis la mise en place de projets de redesign. Notre durée moyenne de séjour globale a diminué de 12%. Notre mortalité au service des urgences a diminué d'1 tiers. Et l'attente pour les chirurgies électives qui dépassaient les recommandations initiales a diminué de 98%. Donc aujourd'hui, je pense qu'on peut conclure qu'on a tous l'opportunité d'atteindre d'excellents résultats en utilisant le design thinking. Pour nous, notre approche a été de mettre en place un système de formation très pratique, mais qui s'inscrit dans une démarche organisationnelle et qui est également ensuite adopté au niveau de l'État. En tout cas, ce qui est vraiment important pour nous tous, c'est de faire le premier pas, qui est de commencer la mise en pratique. Alors, j'ai ramené quelques pense-bêtes en forme de balles. Et on a découvert ce matin avec Roger qu'on faisait la même chose, mais en fait, je pense que c'est parce que si vous habitez en Australie, il faut apprendre à lancer quelque chose dans le public. Donc, je vais essayer de viser. Je n'ai pas encore ma citoyenneté, mais je vais essayer de viser un pense-bête par là-bas. Ah voilà, super. Je ne vise pas très loin. Bravo, merci. Oh, c'est bon, c'est bon. Je vais en viser un au milieu. Hop, super. Et un. Ah là, je n'ai pas réussi à faire ça. Je la garde. Je vois que quelqu'un a envie de mettre en pratique. En tout cas, l'idée de cette balle, c'est juste de la garder avec vous. Je vais vous demander de la garder avec vous. Et de la garder jusqu'à ce que vous ayez mis en pratique ce que vous êtes proposé au début de cette présentation. Pour que je m'excuse, parce que je n'ai pas 500 balles, mais... je vais faire la quête à la sortie de la conférence. En tout cas, pour les autres, une balle en papier ou un petit mémo dans votre téléphone devrait suffire, mais je pense qu'au nom des usagers de notre ville, au nom de nos seniors, au nom des patients qui nous attendent, n'oubliez pas de le mettre en pratique, car seule la mise en pratique fera la différence. Merci.
Bon, je pense, là, normalement, si c'était un atelier que j'ai animé, je dirais que c'est le moment d'un échauffement, un jeu d'échauffement, hein, parce que après dîner, alors peut-être on peut chauffer nos mains ensemble. Chauffer, chauffer, chauffer et feu. Ok, on essaie encore et vous allez crier feu avec moi. Chauffer, 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 feu, 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 feu. Bien, ok, bon. Je me suis donné un défi aujourd'hui de vous présenter ça en français. C'est mon première fois. Bon, alors, la politique d'aujourd'hui, c'est plutôt une politique descendante. Nos élus nous informent de leurs décisions. On entend parler beaucoup de participation, on entend depuis 20 ans, peut-être 30 ans. Ségolène Royal en a beaucoup parlé, mais ça reste quand même un mantra qui est répété, et on n'en voit pas beaucoup. Heureusement, dans nos sociétés, on commence à le voir plus. Les élus, ils sont informés par des sondages, les médias, des expertises, et heureusement, de plus en plus, des concertations publiques.
Mais comme on a vu et comme Marie nous a montré, ce n'est pas tout le monde qui va venir à cette concertation publique. En fait, nous avons vu que ces réunions ne reflètent pas du tout la diversité que nous trouvons dans nos villes, dans nos villages. Donc, comment on peut faire pour trouver cette diversité? Parce qu'on sait que du plus riche au plus pauvre, chacun a quelque chose à contribuer. Et pour trouver des solutions durables pour le futur, pour l'avenir, pour résoudre les grands problèmes auxquels nous faisons face aujourd'hui, nous avons besoin de tous ces différentes parties du puzzle. Et c'est comme ça qu'on va trouver des solutions plus fortes, plus concrètes. Donc, comment on peut faire? On dit en Angleterre que ces groupes marginalisés sont des groupes hard to reach. C'est un label que j'aime pas du tout. Alors donc, ils sont difficiles à atteindre. Dans notre expérience, en fait, ce n'est pas ces groupes-là qui sont difficiles à atteindre, c'est les politiciens qui sont difficiles à atteindre. Parce qu'eux aussi, par fonction de leur poste, se trouvent isolés. Souvent, ils veulent avoir plus d'informations du terrain, mais ils ne peuvent pas. Donc, ces projets de concertation restent quand même un grand outil pour nous. Comment faire pour inclure la diversité? Parce qu'ils ne vont pas toujours venir. Il faut vraiment, et c'est pareil dans notre entreprise aussi, dans les universités, partout où on trouve des hiérarchies, on va trouver qu'il y a un grand écart entre ceux qui décident et les citoyens, disons, et ceux qui font. Et on m'a dit qu'en France, on dit c'est celui qui fait qui sait. N'est-ce pas? Et je me suis trompé tout à l'heure, j'ai dit c'est celui qui fait sait. Et il faut dire, et quelqu'un m'a dit, il ne faut surtout pas dire ça. Bon, je l'ai dit. Donc, je vais vous donner un exemple d'un projet que nous avons fait en Angleterre, à Oxford. C'est sur le Cowley Road. C'est une des voies principales qui emmène les gens dans la ville d'Oxford. C'est aussi une route très animée, une rue très animée où il y a des restaurants asiatiques, caribéennes et beaucoup de diversité dans la population. Donc, le ministère de Transport voulait aménager cette route. Comment faire pour inclure cette diversité qu'on voyait sur la route dans nos projets de concertation? Alors, je vais vous montrer une petite, pas encore, pas tout de suite, parce qu'on a trouvé que dans la concertation finale publique, il y avait très peu de visages des groupes marginalisés, les différents groupes ethniques, des gens handicapés, les jeunes, les seniors, ils n'y étaient pas. Heureusement que les films qu'on a faits avec ces populations, ils étaient pour que leur voix soit entendue. Donc, on travaille avec les vidéos. Et on commence par des jeux ludiques, amusants, où chacun utilise la caméra et puis le passe à son voisin. Comme ça, chacun apprend à utiliser, à manier la caméra, pousser son record, le cadrer à son voisin. Et ensuite, on utilise des méthodes pour faire un travail plus approfondi. C'est des méthodes participatives dont je vois que les Design Thinkers utilisent. Et là, on a utilisé quelque chose développé par un de nos partenariats au Brooks University. C'était un modèle avec des images de la rue. Comme ça, les gens pouvaient se souvenir de la rue et toutes les problématiques autour de sécurité. Donc, avec ces outils-là, et ils ont utilisé le vidéo, et ensemble, on fait une vidéo collective. Ce n'est pas la voix d'une seule personne ou une autre, c'est vraiment le groupe ensemble qui trouve un consensus et puis le partage en vidéo. Et c'est ça qu'on a pu montrer dans la concertation finale. Donc, il y avait plusieurs clés de succès de ce projet. Vraiment, la première, je pense, c'est qu'on a travaillé avec 5 représentants de ces groupes marginalisés qu'on voulait viser. Et c'est avec eux qu'on les a formés, initiés dans la vidéo participative, pour qu'on puisse co-animer les ateliers ensemble et pour qu'ils puissent ouvrir les portes vers ces groupes-là. Ça, c'était très important et c'est comme ça qu'on travaille souvent. Ce n'est pas nous qui animons tout seuls, mais on co-anime ça avec des gens locaux et des groupes cernés. Et c'est quelque chose, je pense, que Design Thinking pourrait peut-être... j'ai entendu que vous êtes bon à emprunter des choses. Là, j'espère que je vais partager des choses que vous pouvez emprunter. Parce que nous aussi, on le fait, hein, et on va emprunter beaucoup de Design Thinking. Alors, faisons un partage. Donc, les vidéos maintenant. Qui a une vidéo dans leur poche, là, en ce moment? Une caméra vidéo? Pas plus? Je pense, oui, presque tout le monde. Donc, ça, c'est ce que j'appelle, ça c'est nos caméras là, et ça, c'est des caméras élevées en liberté. Elles passent de main à main, dans tous les différents pays du monde où on travaille. Inside Share, c'est mon organisation, c'est une organisation sociale. On travaille comme ça depuis 16 ans, dans plus de 50 pays, sur plus de 200 projets de vidéo participative. Là, c'est dans un bidonville en Sud-Afrique. Là, c'est à Londres, c'est dans des endroits défavorisés à Londres. Uganda et Éthiopie, pour en montrer quelques-uns. Donc, j'ai beaucoup aimé ce que Roger nous a montré, les dessins qu'il a faits, parce que nous, on utilise beaucoup cet outil-là, les storyboards. Donc, il a pu exprimer dans quelques dessins l'histoire qu'il voulait partager. C'était super. Donc, on travaille beaucoup avec les storyboards. Et c'est toute la groupe avec qui on travaille qui le crée ensemble. C'est une co-création avant d'utiliser la caméra. Donc, on fait les travaux approfondis de recherche ensemble, de regarder, analyser le problème, les situations, les causes du problème. Et puis, ils élaborent ensemble un storyboard pour communiquer leur consensus, leurs idées qui ont émergé de ce travail. Donc, nos caméras, ils ont beaucoup de chance, comme je vous l'ai dit, pas comme celles qui sont élevées en captivité dans vos poches, là. Et je vais vous emmener là en Cameroun, où on a travaillé avec les Baka. C'est le peuple autochtone, les premiers habitants du forêt, et depuis des centaines d'années, ils ont subi beaucoup de pression, beaucoup de difficultés. Il y a d'autres populations qui ont rentré dans la forêt pour s'installer, les Bantous et d'autres, et ils ont souvent coupé des arbres pour pouvoir faire de l'agriculture. Petit à petit, les Baka sont devenus des serviteurs à contrat, en servitude de contrat, sous contrat, c'est ça qu'on dit. Alors, les familles entières appartiennent presque à des familles bantoues, et si on est né Baka, on est souvent né avec ce contrat déjà sur nous. Donc, ce sont des populations extrêmement marginalisées et persécutées. Quand on a fait une formation avec eux, il y avait 2 femmes qui sont allées filmer les célébrations d'indépendance du Cameroun. 2 femmes Baka, et les Bantous n'en revenaient pas. Ils pensaient qu'ils n'étaient pas capables de ça. Donc, il y a des grands stéréotypes à casser déjà, et beaucoup de travail à faire pour qu'ils puissent être entendus et pour que ces citoyens-là peuvent aussi participer dans les décisions qui les affectent du jour à l'autre. Donc, il y a quelques mois, on a téléphoné Messé Venant. Il est Baka et il a fondé l'association Okani, qui travaille avec les Baka, et c'est eux notre partenaire local. Donc, on les a formés dans le vidéo participative et on a laissé les outils et les capacités pour qu'ils puissent continuer. Et là, on va entendre c'était intéressant pour nous de savoir comment ça allait, là, 2 ans après. Donc, c'est la prochaine. Ouais.
Ça a attiré beaucoup d'attention sur nous. Les gens ont dit, ça, ces gens, ils ont une idée géniale. Et cela nous a permis, même au niveau du gouvernement, d'avoir des relations assez solides parce que les gens de plus en plus nous ont sollicités pour réaliser, collecter des points de vue dans les écoles, dans les villages, pour que nous puissions les présenter à des séminaires. Nous avons réalisé un film sur l'éducation. Alors, quand nous sommes allés à cette réunion en comité de pilotage où il y avait les représentants des enseignants, il y avait les inspecteurs des écoles primaires, il y avait les responsables de l'éducation, nous avons projeté ces éléments-là, où les parents donnent leur avis sur l'éducation, les enfants eux-mêmes critiquent les enseignants, et les membres du bureau, des parents d'élèves, qui donnent des perspectives pour améliorer la vie à l'école. Et lorsqu'on s'est assis avec les responsables de l'éducation, le mois qui suivait, le délégué de l'éducation a fait quelque chose en affectant les enseignants dans les écoles où les parents et les enfants Baka se plaignaient qu'ils n'avaient pas d'enseignants. Donc ça a été aussi un résultat assez important.
Donc, Messé nous a raconté une histoire qu'on entend souvent et qui nous fait rejoindre aussi. C'est qu'ils ont pu ouvrir ces voies de communication entre les citoyens qui étaient très marginalisés et les politiques. Et il y a eu des impacts réels. Donc ça c'est très bien, mais pour nous c'est pas assez en fait. Ce qui nous intéresse vraiment, c'est de bâtir ces infrastructures à long terme, où les citoyens peuvent négocier et renégocier avec les politiques locales. Donc Messé nous a transmis un peu plus d'informations sur des résultats, les genres de résultats qu'on voit quand ces genres d'outils sont utilisés à long terme. Et c'est quelquefois des résultats vraiment remarquables et inattendus.
Dans beaucoup de circonscriptions électorales où il y a soit des élections, on ne trouve presque pas les peuples autochtones, dans les Baka de notre région. Alors, nous nous sommes dit, peut-être il y a lieu de faire quelque chose pour que nous assurions la représentativité des Baka dans les instances de prise de décision. Nous avons travaillé avec Plan Cameroun dans le cadre de la vidéo participative pendant presque une année et demie dans 11 communes. Nous avons tellement demandé, présenté des résultats autour de la vidéo participative. Et aujourd'hui, voilà un résultat aussi important qu'on peut mettre dans l'actif de la vidéo participative. Le score des conseillers municipaux dans les communes forestières au Cameroun s'est nettement amélioré. On est parti presque de 3 conseillers municipaux à 18 conseillers que nous sommes aujourd'hui.
OK. Donc, un grand résultat, et c'est, oui, bravo à Okami. Donc là, on voit vraiment comment les citoyens peuvent être impliqués dans les politiques d'aujourd'hui. Mais en fait, ce qui est intéressant pour nous, c'est le changement systémique aussi. C'est comme vous, les designers, c'est comment... Il y a beaucoup de choses qui marchent aujourd'hui dans nos systèmes démocratiques et politiques. Il y a aussi beaucoup de choses qui ne marchent pas. Et on peut se demander, la troisième question importante pour le changement systémique, c'est comment mieux faire. Et pour nous, c'est le citoyen qui est plus proche des problématiques qui va trouver les meilleures solutions, les solutions les plus adaptées. Participation, c'est très bien, mais j'aimerais voir plus de pouvoir et plus de pouvoir de décision mis dans les mains de ceux qui font. Et c'est pareil dans les entreprises, on parle de ça et on commence à le voir. Donc j'espère qu'on va le voir plus dans nos politiques aussi. Cette implication, mettre les citoyens au cœur du politique publique, c'est dans les conceptions des projets de politique publique, c'est une partie de l'histoire. L'autre partie de l'histoire, c'est qu'est-ce qui se passe une fois que ces projets sont mis en cours. Comment est-ce qu'on peut être sûr du transparence, que c'est en fait efficace, que ces projets, ils arrivent à atteindre les personnes qu'ils visent. C'est pour ça que nous avons aussi fait comme les designers, on a emprunté des méthodes d'évaluation qui étaient faites surtout sur papier par un expert extérieur. Et on a mélangé ça, on a fait des mash-ups avec le vidéo participative. Et donc, depuis quelques années, on commence à utiliser cette méthode d'évaluation et de suivi qui utilise le vidéo participative. C'est donc mettre le caméra et le voir dans les mains des bénéficiaires ou des clients ou des gens visés. Parce qu'eux, ils sont les mieux placés pour dire qu'est-ce qui marche pas et comment ça pourrait être mieux. Donc on fait ça autour des histoires. On a entendu des histoires aujourd'hui et c'est quelque chose qui marche globalement. Donc les participants partagent leurs histoires vécues du projet. Qu'est-ce que ça a fait dans leur vie? Quel est le changement le plus important que ça a mené dans leur vie? Ils partagent ces histoires et puis ils sélectionnent une qui représente pour eux le changement le plus significatif. C'est très subjectif, mais c'est ça qui est intéressant, parce que c'est eux qui décident quels sont les critères de sélection. Tout ça, c'est noté, et tout ça fait partie de l'analyse en finale. Et l'analyse, c'est aussi fait par les bénéficiaires, par les participants. Donc, je vais vous montrer un petit clip d'une évaluation et suivi qu'on a fait sur des projets de UNICEF et Search for Common Ground en Côte d'Ivoire. Ils travaillent avec des jeunes qui, souvent, c'est des jeunes qui étaient soldats pendant les crises. Et maintenant, ils sont dans les écoles. Il y a beaucoup de violence dans les écoles, des gangs. UNICEF et Search for Common Ground font ce travail pour convertir ces membres de gangs dans des ambassadeurs de paix. C'est un travail incroyable. Et donc, ces jeunes-là qui participaient dans le projet ont pu partager leurs histoires vécues de changement. Je vais juste vous montrer le début.
Énorme potentiel, sa vision était claire. Ressemblait à ses modèles comme les gosses de son âge qui rêvent de s'élever vers le ciel. Jouer au foot tel que Nas, comme Didier Drogba. Avoir la classe de Barack Obama. Yes, week-end rêve de milliers d'enfants sur le continent. Mais trop de larmes coulent encore malheureusement.
Bon, je suis là pour la formation de la vidéo participative.
Mais ce n'est plus un jeu, il y a bien trop d'enjeux, je suis un soldat, un petit soldat.
On voit pour toi, on voit ce que tu as là. Voilà, on voit ça.
Mais ce n'est plus un jeu, il y a bien trop d'enjeux, je suis un soldat qui veut tout arrêter, tout arrêter.
Mais du rêve au cauchemar, sa vie va basculer dans la pire désolation. Ils l'ont précipité, compte tenu de la violence, ses rêves vont se briser. Ça fait assez offert, il va tout essayer.
Dans le vacarme des armes, je vois couler ses larmes. Le son cœur qui s'emballe, entre tressaillit son âme. La violence des adultes qui font cracher les armes.
J'étais beaucoup violent quand j'étais très petit. À partir de 8 ans déjà, je savais manipuler les armes et même les tirer.
Et dans le lycée était reconnu pour la violence.
Je me faisais arracher mon pain, on me dépossédait de mon argent.
Soit faut intégrer un gang, ou soit faut avoir des gens pour pouvoir te protéger.
Donc c'est tout ce qu'on va voir. Et ces films-là sont montrés maintenant localement, mais vous avez vu que pour nous, le premier but, ce n'est pas de faire des films. Pour nous, le caméra, c'est un outil qui emmène les gens ensemble. En fait, tout à l'heure, quelqu'un a parlé du Magritte, de ceci n'est pas une pipe. Je pense qu'on peut dire ceci n'est pas un caméra pour nous. Pour nous, c'est comme un élément magnétique rassembleur qui attire les gens d'abord de participer et qui renforce les relations entre eux et qui aussi arrive à diminuer cet écart entre les politiciens et les citoyens. C'est aussi un genre de miroir qui donne le reflet, parce que tout ce qu'ils filment, ils le regardent et puis ils le montrent à leur communauté plus large, à les groupes plus larges. Ça donne une autre vue sur soi-même et aussi on arrive à voir les choses du perspective de l'autre. Donc c'est aussi un outil d'empathie parce que c'est très rare en fait que dans la vie quotidienne qu'on s'écoute sans interrompre. Bon, avec le caméra, quand quelqu'un est en train d'interviewer, on écoute. Quand on le regarde, on l'écoute encore. C'est donc vraiment comme une oreille empathique pour nous. C'est aussi un genre de lampe de poche qui aide à trouver les solutions et dévoiler les causes des problèmes. Et c'est les populations eux-mêmes qui font ces recherches. C'est ça qui est intéressant. Et on peut dire que, je ne sais pas si c'est un dicton ou si c'est quelque chose qu'on a inventé, mais nous, à Inside Share, on dit qu'un souris avec un mégaphone devient comme un lion. Donc, ça fait un peu cet effet-là de mégaphone. Et aussi, on peut dire que c'est un clé, parce qu'à travers cet outil-là, les participants peuvent avoir accès à des mondes, à des personnes, à des politiciens, à des décideurs qui n'auront pas normalement accès. Ça ouvre ces portes-là. Donc, un autre outil, maintenant, très ancien, ce n'est pas très haute technologie, qu'on utilise beaucoup maintenant, c'est ça. C'est un bâton. Mais ceci n'est pas un bâton. C'est un bâton de parole. Donc, nous avons encore chopé des idées d'autres et emprunté des méthodologies. Là, cette fois-ci, c'est de la justice restaurative et de médiation pour faire des dialogues encore plus fructueux entre les décideurs et les participants. Vous avez vu peut-être les cercles de parole. On essaye de mettre ces groupes-là ensemble dans un espace où d'écoute privilégiée et dans une équité de parole. Donc nous continuons à évoluer nos méthodes et je vois que le design thinking aussi, vous regardez l'avenir pour évoluer vos méthodes. Je pense qu'ensemble, on peut faire des choses très intéressantes. Et j'aimerais bien que vous essayiez de voir comment, et vous le faites déjà, mais comment renforcer cette capacité à long terme. Comment bâtir des fondations, des infrastructures pour que les citoyens peuvent continuer à agir de cette façon et être acteurs propres dans leur changement. Je vais vous terminer donc avec le dernier. Je pense que c'est mieux que vous le lisez, pas moi. Donc c'est sur ce dicton qu'on connaît souvent, si tu me donnes un poisson. Mais après, on voit quelque chose de différent. Là, vous m'aurez nourri jusqu'à ce que la rivière soit contaminée, que l'arrivage soit vendu pour être développé. Mais si tu m'apprends à m'organiser, alors quel que soit le défi, je pourrai rejoindre les miens et nous modèlerons notre propre solution. Donc c'est ça que je vise et c'est ça que j'espère pour le futur, de design thinking aussi. Merci beaucoup.
Unfortunately, I have to speak in English. So when I was a kid, my parents used to speak to each other in French. So this is their way of preventing me and my other sisters of learning what they're saying, except we did learn. We learned to listen, learned to understand, but we didn't learn to speak, so I'm at disadvantage. Let's see. So what I'm going to talk about here is about a work that we did at Harvard, which is related to introducing design to undergraduate as well as graduate students. And the actual work itself, you can think about it as a design process and design thinking process. So you're hearing kind of convolution of both the implementation of design through a design process. The fact is that any design, anytime that you want to make a change, the change has to look at the complete, deal with the complete ecosystem and try to figure out the element of the ecosystem and try how to modify all the parts of the ecosystems. Harvard is an interesting place. It's very complex, and it has a lot of traditions. Harvard was started around 1600, so we are kind of old with many different ways, a lot of tradition, a lot of things that's been done at a certain time you can and cannot change. So kind of interesting traditions here. On the other hand, there is a good leadership, and there is quite a bit of eagerness to be the best, so that really helps quite a bit. The process of redesigning started with a formal action that the university decided that we are going to be, we were a division in the School of Faculty of Art and Science, and we were decided in 2007 to become a new school by itself. And we had two edicts. One of them is that we need to increase the number of faculty and we need to introduce new areas. Now, if you know Harvard, you would say this is kind of interesting because last time Harvard introduced a new school or established a new school was about 100 years ago. So kind of a little long time ago to remember how to start a new school. The school has no department. That's by itself kind of challenges. In some sense, we have quite a bit of degrees. We offer degrees in engineering, applied sciences, and in applied physics and applied math, both undergrad and graduate degrees. On the other hand, we don't have department, which is, in my opinion, is very, very, very useful. It allows to do a lot of interesting things. So when it comes down to activities, we have activities, we call them areas, intellectual areas, and bioengineering, applied computation, computer science, environmental engineering, nanoengineering, robotics, and materials, and some others too. So students come in, and the faculty, about 90 faculty members, they decide who is going to teach what. The students get the teaching normally from different professors who are not necessarily expert in the subject, but they know enough to be able to provide a lot of guidance, a lot of knowledge. So when we looked at the implementing design and how we're thinking about it, obviously we have to start with the curriculum. We have to think how we change the curriculum. Kind of interesting thing, where does it start? Obviously it starts with the faculty. Faculty have to believe that this is something they want to do, and they want to start thinking about and doing it. But the students at Harvard has a lot of power, I would say, and they can vote with their feet, meaning they can decide whether they want to go in this particular class, attend it or not. They have a lot of freedom to decide what courses they want to take. So we better, as we say, get food, as I say, have the dog food need to be good enough for the dog to eat, kind of, in some way. So in this case here, the students were part of the stakeholders. The administration, of course, has to believe that this is something important to support it financially and otherwise. And the parents are very important here because they participate a lot in everything we do, and they influence quite a bit the decision-making inside the university. And of course, the rest of the world. The rest of the world is kind of interesting. Anytime we make any change of any sort, everybody notices, and criticism comes from every direction. So everything has to be ticking in a certain way, in a nice way. So we established a bunch of messages, and these messages went out, and people heard them, and they argued over them, and they thought about them, and so on. One message is that engineering is rooted in human issues, and therefore, when we are teaching people how to solve problems, and problems are related to human issues, 21st century issues, which makes people kind of interested and excited. Second, we said that we need to enable creation of new leadership. And that's a very critical word, and a lot of people resonate with this thought process and what needs to be done. So we said we need different tools, we need to have different ways of introducing the knowledge, and we also said that whatever we're doing is connected to the business, and that's interests quite a bit of the parents. The message around design, we say design is exciting, it's a creative process, we are forward-looking activities, multidisciplinary, everything we know about design, we articulated, we try to explain to all the stakeholders. And there are some details, of course, we went into. Students really had to understand that now they have to think about their studies in a slightly different way from taking individual exams and being examined on very specific materials and specific activities with known outcomes. The other messages we gave is around education and participating in economic development. We said university has to have two roles. One of them is to educate people and make them good citizens and be able to create students who can solve problems. But on the other hand, the university has another role which is related to economic development, and that was related to innovation, and clearly design and design thinking can be beneficial for both. So we used a particular definition for design. It's not very profound. We said design is every act that can turn existing situation into a desired one. A very generic and very broad concept. And we showed diagrams like these. We're all familiar with these. We emphasize the areas where between the intersections, and we emphasize that design is not only interdisciplinary, is even transdisciplinary, where we're looking at things in a much broader way than the discipline themselves. We talked about how design also can connect to the business and can create some values in terms of innovation and inventions. So for the students, most of the time we spend a lot of time around when we talk about the design flow. People get it very easily, but very quickly students want to jump into making something. And you spend a lot of time asking about the root cause for a problem. And that was kind of interesting for a lot of people to hold them from jumping to a solution or jumping to define a problem and run after a solution. So that was kind of interesting experience. So with time, it was only 2009 before we really implemented some of these thoughts. We started looking at what we call education beyond technology, where you start seeing pictures like these, where students are working outside the classrooms, in the field, working with each others as teams, and many times exploring new concept with some customers. One example of this is a course, I happen to teach this course occasionally. It's an introduction to design where 15 students work together to look at mitigating a large-scale problem, more of a things like, for instance, a year ago we did Fukushima. We looked at the problem Fukushima, and we had the students with a customer from TEPCO working with TEPCO around what are the problems that they're facing, learning about it, and trying to mitigate. And very quickly, the first thing the students look at is that the Fukushima workers had these masks on their face, and the mask is not adequate, and they said, okay, let's redesign the mask. And after a lot of iteration, we found out the mask is really not the problem. The problem was cooling the reactor. To get to that stage, the students had to go through a lot of processes and understanding to see that the root cause of the problem is not what's observed on the front. We did also things like looking at crimes in a city western of Boston called Springfield. There is a huge colony of we could call it criminals who are living there, and it was extremely difficult to figure out what they do and how they do things, and we were able to, with the students, to work together. This was a picture of a TV show, and where they took pictures of the students working and figuring out what they need to do to figure the criminal network, and the students really did a fantastic job. Okay, on the graduate side, what we tried to do is we started 2 years ago thinking about a program where it's a master degree program, and it's a collaborative program between engineering and the School of Architecture, or Graduate School of Architecture. This is, by the way, the first ever a collaboration degree between two schools. Harvard having to be very decentralized. We have what's called joint degrees, where you can take courses in 2 places and get 2 degrees, but this is very different. This is a single degree offered by 2 schools at the same time. So the concept is, again, to take design thinking, add to it some engineering skill sets, so that the wheels will not fall off the cart, as we heard this morning, and add to it also visual art, which is very important. Looking at the 3 in an integrated way, the students will work as a team and will be able to, basically all their work is around solving problems and solving open-ended problems. So they are allowed to take 8 courses. These 8 courses could be any courses inside Harvard University. They don't have any particular courses to take, except that they have to work in teams, and they have to work on a thesis on a problem of their choice, supervised by some students. This is the kind of courses example of courses one can look at, and you can see they are a mixture of technical and non-technical courses. So what we did is, through this, as we are moving forward, we had a lot of investment. It increased number of faculty, increased enrollment. It ended up with increasing enrollment, both on the discipline side, also on the students who are coming from different disciplines and just taking courses. And you could see the numbers moved, let's say, from like 250 to something like 800 students. So that was very encouraging, very interesting. On the other hand, since the number of students at Harvard is conserved, meaning we can't increase the number of students, we have admit only 1,600 students a year. What you saw here is, as we are moving up, our numbers moving up. If I turn it here, the number of engineering moving up, some other numbers start to go down, in particular humanities and social sciences. And that added a lot of complexity inside the university, a lot of pressure on us. Are we stealing students from other disciplines? And of course we're not. Students, basically, they are really interested in this area here, and through the changes we made, they became far more interested in something related to engineering. So through that, we saw an increase in infrastructure and support staff. We had to do that. So far, what I told you is a story, what you could say it's a story of success. Now, the question is, how did we do it? It's not as simple as I described here. It wasn't like we introduced things. This is a picture from the time when Harvard started, around 1636, something like that. So not much have changed, actually. The buildings are still the same, believe it or not. Maybe inside them they have changed, but outside they look very similar. The point that we quickly realized is that we're really dealing with a complex system. And we have to deal how we solve this complex system. As any complex system, you have to deal with all the elements, think about them, and try to change most of the elements at the same time. Now, the system is driven by quality. That's good. And we also know that the system is resilient, meaning it's very difficult to move it from its location, but when it moves and sticks around. And that's a kind of interesting too. So we also viewed how the decision-making takes place. It happened to be, it's extremely faculty-driven. If the faculty don't vote yes to something, you can't move forward. The master degree I mentioned before was it took us 2 years to get a yes vote with a lot of work from a lot of people. But once you get it, you can move forward. And the administration have to lend quite a bit of support, and without it, things really don't work. At the same time, you have to see that we are really driven by grassroots decisions and initiatives. So how does it go? We were looking for what I call it here weak signals, meaning someone, whether it's a student or faculty or a group of students or a group of faculty, decide to do something. And you see if it's positive, if the students in general are responsive positively to it, excited about it. And then if that's the case, you enforce it. And then you continue to see how it evolves in time. And the system has to lend support. If it didn't, things really don't go forward. So the weak signal can come from students. They want certain clubs, they want certain experiment, they want certain tools, and you keep hearing that. The faculty come and say, I want to do this, I want to do that. You also need to see that. The students are our customers in that sense, and we can tell when the students are responding positively or not. And the education staff, of course, they are participant in that mix. So a lot of investment went into these so-called, I'm calling you here, small or weak signals. When the weak signal becomes stronger and clear that there is a good responsiveness to those, we enforce it more. And we watch for, and we notice how these signals are changing and evolving. So some signals fizzled, basically disappeared. And that happened quite a bit. And some signals start to grow, some activities start to grow. And when they grow, we enforce it by financial support or human support. And you could see how it's evolving and becoming stronger. And eventually, we reach a formal process. That is, a decision takes place through several iterations. Many of these iterations are fast in time. They could be a semester, could be 2 semesters, so it's not really bureaucratic in any way. So this is just an illustration of what takes place. Just quickly, start with the faculty. Faculty decide on particular curriculum change or pedagogy change. An example of that is, for instance, Eric Mazur, some of you may know him. He decided he is going to do not only flipped classrooms, but he is not going to have a classroom at all. They are going to be in the open areas where they're going to learn about applied physics through experiments. And the experiment was taking a trip to Mars. So through that project, going to Mars, he's going to learn about applied physics. Kind of interesting for someone who's never taken applied physics before. That pedagogy change, we watched it, we saw how it works, how students are responding to it, and when the students really responded positively, we helped, we enhanced it, we get some support, we get some staff, most of these staff are PhDs working with Eric and trying to make it happen right. So when students respond positively, the system supported the activity. Staff came in and started helping the faculty and helping the changes. We also made huge changes in infrastructure based on these requirements. For instance, most of our classrooms were very similar to what we see here. People are sitting, some of you are sitting watching, some of you are half asleep. I don't know, I can see you very well. But nevertheless, people are sitting. Okay. Most of the classroom right now, we have videos inside the classroom. We have ability to interact. Students can, I'll show you some picture of that later. Students can interact by turning around the tables and sitting together and working together. The system looks as if it's going one direction, meaning the faculty and staff working with the students. That's not the case. Many times, actually, students decided to do certain things, and the faculty had to respond to it, enforce it, and work with the students to make it happen. So the results are really kind of interesting because this is the number of courses. I've taken some statistics, doesn't mean this is every course, but there are quite a few courses that took design to heart and they became 100% design oriented. There are some, we tested them into 4 different elements in terms of problem solving, implementing and verification, project management, and teamwork and communication. And we asked every professor who said, yeah, I have design work in my class, to quantify how much of these elements do exist in their classes. Some are high, some low, and you could see there is distribution to this kind of design content. Same thing when it came to looking at students doing actual work, active work, not only just thinking about the design. The number really were increased significantly from 2010 till in 4 or 5 years. An incredible number of students have been participant in active learning. Finally, I just want to say show some picture. This is a computer science course. It doesn't look like computer science, but it is computer science course. This is a professor in applied mathematics, Mike Brenner, teaching a course on science of cooking. Other students are doing all kind of other activities. Last one here, you see some students are working in Harvard kitchen to study sustainability. This is a guy and 3 students working on designing a medical instrument and taking it to India to implement it there. Professor Mazur here teaching, you see him somewhere there sitting with the students teaching applied physics. Material taught by Just. This is a course of mine. It's a fabrication course. Students are working within the course. Looking at places, this is a typical old picture, but still it's a typical kind of a classroom, and how we moved it to become completely different. This is the same space, complete renovation, and completely different setup for the students to learn and work. Different equipment came to the labs, and today, believe it or not, we have design fair, project and design fair. It happened to be at 11 o'clock, so probably now or an hour ago started. It's a huge number of students displaying their activities, their projects, and it's done in an open space outside what's called the Science Center. So the question at the moment here, so where do we go from here? And I'd like to pose it also not for us, but to you folks here. We all spend a good time hearing about a lot of examples, very good examples about design and design thinking, and how positive this methodology has been. But what could be, let me say, design thinking 2, version 2 of that, and how could it evolve? This is a personal choice, so it's not meant to be Harvard necessarily. It's really personal for me. I think one of the things that we've been doing and doing very well is taking knowledge, whether it's a design or general knowledge, and implement it into system thinking and design thinking, and creating a transdisciplinary education. That's marvelous, that's fantastic, and we should do more of that. I think what's missing, though, is the whole issue around emotional maturity. Whether it's a consciousness or emotional maturity, let's lead to mindfulness. And I think that's an element that's, we in the education segment, we have not experienced it enough, we have not pushed it enough. I'm not sure about it in general, but I would say that's an area we should look more into. So when I think about education in general, I see more 2 segments of education need to take place at the same time. Some around the transdisciplinary education, and which is structural knowledge, and some of it is about emotional and consciousness. And between the 2 together, hopefully, we'll get to a much higher level system in terms of implementation and implications. Thank you very much.
Bon après-midi, tout le monde. About 18 months ago, I was invited actually in another room in this building to lecture. And the prof who invited me, having noticed on my profile that I speak French, asked if I could present in French. And I was thrilled with the perspective, so I prepared all my slides in French. I brushed up on my terminology, and I arrived here, and in the auditorium, when we asked the students, 2/3 of the young people wanted the lecture in English. I did do it in French after all this preparation. I wasn't going to. But I learned a lesson. Number 1, do not assume a French audience wanted in French always. And number 2, I learned also, do not challenge yourself at the bottom of a jet lag, which is where we are. So today I would like to tell you a little story of change. You heard from Fawaz about the one type of change that happens in higher education institutions, which is put it, plan it, get the approval, convince everybody, and so on. And it's a tremendous task. I know exactly, some people say that any collaboration between 2 institutions at Harvard is an act of God. But what I would like to tell you today is a story of a different type of change. And that story is from my own institution. So OCAD is the Ontario College of Art and Design. It is over 135 years old, which I understand is a baby age for the European institutions. But from the New World, it's a pretty venerous age, to deal with. Very well known for art initially, a group of 7, etc. We have a very large design faculty and so on. But we needed to adapt, and we needed to differentiate ourselves. Today, we are about 4,500 undergraduate students, few hundred graduate students, and we're trying to differentiate ourselves by taking the design thinking repertoire or reserves that we have in the institution and apply it outside of art and design, apply it to government and business. So we're doing a lot of things that are really almost business school, but we are not a business school. So we're flying under the radar both on the outside and I have to say on the inside sometimes as well in order to get that going. In 2000, 2001, 2 important events happened. One, OCAD became a degree-granting institution, which takes an act of parliament and so on in Ontario to do, and therefore the institution was suddenly very interested in developing the graduate studies rapidly. And number 2, it was expanding quickly, and there was need for a new building for the expansion. But how to expand? Our campus is actually not a fenced campus. It's an open campus in the downtown Toronto. So the land is very, very expensive. So how would we get that when we were not a very rich institution? The building that you see here, the brick building, is actually the main building of OCAD at the time. And we could not actually remove it and build a high-rise building instead of it because we could not disrupt the operations of the school. So we came up with the idea of building the expansion in the air without land and then connecting it to the other building, which you see here. And in 2004, that building was completed and became a landmark of Toronto. So with that building completed, a group around Lenore Richards, which is was the ex-dean of the Faculty of Design, started thinking about the need for a different type of education. And we heard from a lot of people, Fawaz also spoke about transdisciplinary education, not just multidisciplinary, but transdisciplinary. And the rationale behind it was that if you think about the development of specialization, it's like a tree. So every time, every specialization splits and knows a little bit more about a narrower area, and then a little bit more about narrower area. And some people say at the end, you will know everything about nothing. But the problem is not that. The problem is, as this tree becomes very expansive, we notice that there's a severe communication problem across those different branches of knowledge, even within one specialty. So if you take physics and you look at a quantum physicist and a cosmologist, for example, right? They don't speak the same language. In mathematics, in medicine. So we are having this problem. So the idea was, yes, the specialization is going to go further, but we need to pull back from an education point of view and try to build a horizontal layer of skill sets that allows people to work in multidisciplinary teams. And the reason we need more and more of those teams is that the complex problem that the world is facing cannot be solved by any single entity. They all have to, to be solved collaboratively. And we are not really educated to do that collaboration. So Lenore, who was the lead for this idea, said, how about we focus on one of the new areas like strategic foresight? And she started promoting this idea, convinced a rich philanthropic family to fund a project generously. And so the Beale Center for Strategic Creativity was born. So created center in the university and the center was really keen on operating outside of the bureaucracy of any institution. And so they separated physically, went out, we want to be agile, we want to be this and that. So all well and good so far, really exciting going forward. In 2008, the Beale Center ran into some difficulty because it was a complex space, new space, unexpected challenges. They also made some serious mistakes. It came to a head crash, and the philanthropic family withdrew the funding, and everything crashed. So the Beale Center was closed, and the founders, which were in OCAD, were reintegrated into OCAD. But because, like in many institutions, as you probably all know, failure is a sin, they were not welcomed with open arms. They were just sent to a quiet corner in what we called like the internal exile. So the untouchables, don't talk to them, go sit in your corner. And so, the problem is that this group of people was in touch with their reality outside. So they still believed that there is need for something to happen. And they didn't have any internal support. So what did they do? This is Lenore Richards, who is director of the program I'm going to tell you about today. Lacking resources and support from the inside, they went outside and looked for anybody and everybody who's interested to work with them. That's how I came, actually, to know this program and collaborate with them. And they allowed this group of people to help them design this new idea around a master degree, Master of Design in Strategic Foresight and Innovation. So again, because they didn't have any support from the inside. So she ended up with a tremendously diverse and interesting group of advisors around the table that found some white space and started designing an excellent program. And we managed together to write the 2 thick volumes necessary of documentation to present it to the Ontario Council of Graduate Studies to get accreditation. And we also managed to do something almost illegal, I would say, which is we actually selected and recruited 22 committed students to this program that did not exist yet. Okay, so I hope our president is not going to watch that video. It turned out to be a good decision. We were very upfront with the students. We told them about everything is happening and made them partners in the development of this project. And then we passed the bureaucratic hurdle of OCAD, and then it went to the Ontario Council for Graduate Study. And in their wisdom, they said, what you want to do? No, you cannot do that. That's not how we do things here. So many back and forth explaining why we need a diverse faculty from outside of OCAD, et cetera. They were still not convinced. At the end, we played our last card. We said, please, before you make your final decision, meet with the students that are interested in this program. So we brought them, we put them in a room, and lo and behold, 2 hours later, they came out and say, you might have something there. And they approved the program. So in 2009, this is the first brochure of program, the Master of Design in Strategic Foresight and Innovation, SFI as we call it, was born. Initially as a part-time program for people who are working over 2 years period. And we needed, obviously, to validate. I mean, success is nice, now we have the program, but now we needed to validate that we were on the right track and doing the right thing. So we had to test our students outside. The first test came in 2011. Rotman Business School is the largest business school in Canada. It's part of University of Toronto, and they have a design challenge, very businessy, so they are true clients. In 2011, the challenge was by the Mayo Clinic regarding some issues around maternity management. And a group of our students decided on their own they wanted to participate. We encouraged them. They were not invited because nobody thought that OCAD had the capacity to do so. And they went in and they won. Obviously, Rotman was not amused. They actually forgot to congratulate us. They were so shocked that, where did these guys come from? More funnily, our own administration was so surprised. wow, we have something here, and so on. So, but maybe this is a streak of luck, you know, I mean, it happens every now and then, something, you have good luck and you win. Next year, Rotman made sure the business challenge was from a bank. TD is Toronto Dominion Bank, one of the largest 5 banks in Canada, and it's very businessy, and they wanted to a topic about customer service, from customer to customer relationship, and so on. And 2 of our teams placed 2nd and 3rd. The first place was also by a design team from Illinois Institute of Design, not by Rotman. Now we got their attention, you can believe me. And they recognized that the first time they thanked us for participating there. But we had proven that, yes, we can actually produce graduates that can solve complex problems better than the traditional business students. So just this year, we participated in the HALT Prize, which is a prize by the worldwide competition by the Clinton Global Initiative. It has a $1 million prize. And the challenge this year was to bring early childhood education to 10 million children in urban slums within 5 years. They received 20,000 submissions globally, and 2 of our teams placed in the regional finals, the round of 25. One of them is still trying to get to the final round. So, great story. We established that our success. Now, by that time, we became the show horse of the institution. Every visitor, every minister, everyone that was coming has to go through our labs, has to come to our school. We have to present on that, so again and again. We have now an enrollment on average of about 100 graduate students permanently in the pipeline. We are financially the most stable program in the institution, so obviously it's very nice. So what does this tell us about this kind of change, this kind of innovation, which is different from what Fawaz described? I call it emergent innovation. And there are maybe a couple of lessons we could take from this. The first is that emergent innovation is often born at the edge of the organization, not at the center. The edge is where the people are, the employees of the organization, are in touch with their suppliers, with the customers, with the competitors, and so on. They are more aware of the trends that are happening outside. It takes time for those signals to travel to the center and to be vetted and filtered from one bureaucratic level to other, and so on. By the time it reaches the center, it's way too late. So it's important to realize that it comes from the periphery. And because it comes from the periphery in unexpected patterns, suddenly it's not planned, it rarely fits with the central planning. And therefore, it becomes very annoying to the administration. Like, we spend the strategic planning sessions and we have this wonderful brochure about our plan, and now suddenly these things pop up and they don't fit in our plans. So what happens is that they get resistance. They get shoved away, or they get resisted, or they get exiled, and so on, like happened in the case of the program initially. As described in this case, success doesn't come immediately necessarily in those innovations. The price could be multiple failures and serious failures. I mean, some of the people that were in this institute were really shunned for, the Beale Institute that crashed, were shunned for years. They were like on the untouchable list. So it's hard to do that in traditional organizations. And interestingly enough, when you have suppression, when you have resistance, it creates a counter movement. I call it spite. So when you have resistance, people say, oh, you think this is not a good idea? I'm going to show you what we can do. I'm going to prove to you that we are more clever than you, administration, and so on. It also creates guerrilla tactics, like us recruiting 22 students, including the entire admission process, okay, with the folders and the dossier and everything, before even the program existed, okay? Or writing 2 volumes of documentation for ACGS where we actually knew at that time that the program is not going to be like that. It's going to be evolving very quickly, right? So it is interesting to note that the more you put suppression and resistance, it brings those work around the systems, and it creates this sort of underground economy, if you wish, around the official system and channels. And finally, when you have no support and no close monitoring of what you're doing, because you are in the corner there, this actually could mean design freedom. I think if we were monitored closely at the beginning of the process, we wouldn't have been able to actually design the program that way. So there is always a silver lining, that when you don't have the support and so on, you might have a greater opportunity to design. So in closing, what I would like to leave you with is think about where does such emergent innovation happen in your organizations? Do you see it? Do you know it's happening? Is it resisted? How is it dealt with? And if we are talking about design thinking and the future of design thinking, we heard so many of the others, and I joined my voice to them. It has to be at the systemic level. It has to be at the structural, organizational level in order for it to really become significant. Thank you very much.
Yeah, good afternoon. My name is Uli Weinberg. Yo, it is up. Great. And I'm really happy to be here. And I don't want to bore you with any French, which I learned at school. I'm from Germany. I learned 4 years French. We want to go. We're going to have a nice afternoon. Actually, I think you are very brave to stay the whole day in a non-team mode, listening to lots of people talking about teams, a lot about interactivity. It's so great. Why is that? This is why you are trained and conditioned in a way to do this. You learned this in school, to sit very quiet. You learned this in university. This is a normal university setting. You were sitting there and I want to do my email, but it doesn't work. And you're trained very well. And I want to talk a little bit about 8 years of my experience, kind of de-learning, unlearning students this kind of habits. Because if you would have been at the D.school, Stanford, Potsdam, here, 20 years ago, you would not stand this. You would definitely go out, you would stand out, you would kind of say, no, stop that. Our students hopefully do that. Your students hopefully do that. And Veronique, thanks a lot for setting this whole thing up. I was here several years ago, I saw a little entity, and now you're bringing it, you're growing it perfectly. I want to share about my 8 years of experience being out of the niche. I used to be a specialist in computer graphics, computer animation for 25 years. For 20 years, I'm a professor for computer graphics, computer animation. Since 8 years, I started to run the School of Design Thinking, which is in Potsdam, very close to Berlin. And it's a little school, the Hasso-Plattner Institute is a little IT institute founded by the person, who doesn't work, in the blue shirt, Hasso-Plattner, who is actually the co-founder of SAP, of SAP. And he decided to spend a lot of his private money into education, IT education. This was it, 1998. And then he discovered something at Stanford. He discovered the guys Veronique met also. And we met at the same time at Stanford, about 2007, 2008. But at 2004, those guys, and you have seen the pictures, they were doing something really radical. They were kind of getting rid of this kind of environment. They were saying, let's do what we have heard during the whole day. Let's cross the disciplines. Let's tear down the walls between the disciplines, and let's create something which we do an experiment, we call it the D.school. At that time, it was completely new. Design thinking was not new. Tearing down walls was also not new. There was at least lots of history. We have seen it. If you think at Bauhaus 100 years ago, they tried to do this between the arts, also tear down the walls. But they were saying, let's do it 360 degrees. Not just apart, not just the engineering department, no. They were saying, we want to invite the medical students, the biology students, the mechanical engineers, the artists, the sports students, all of them. We want to get all their knowledge because we know tackling complex problems is not anymore possible or solving them just out of one perspective. and also not just with a set of experts. We need a complex setting. And this was a great idea. At that time, it was fully crazy. In the university setting, also to do something which they implemented with no grading. Don't grade any single person. Big step. So, I was invited then, 2007, by Hasso Plattner, because he was the founder, the financier in the back at Stanford, and then he was saying that it seems to be a successful model. We need the same thing also in Europe. We need it also in Germany. So they found me as a person who is related somehow to a digital history, but also in the field of creativity. And since that time, I have the pleasure to run that thing. And I got to know all those people, especially the students. And I'm doing this now in Potsdam. We did the same, very similar thing. But since we were such a small institute, we are not a large university like this one here, and not like Stanford. So we're just 500 students, all IT. So what we did, we opened up to all universities in the neighborhood. To the Humboldt University, Technical University Berlin, to all the universities in the neighborhood. The interesting thing was, at the first year, we had actually students from, I think, 16 universities. 40 students from 16 universities from 30 different backgrounds. But already in the second year, students started to apply from all over Europe and then from all over the world. And all of a sudden, we had students from South America, from Shanghai, from North Europe, from everywhere. And we couldn't believe it, because what we were offering is just a 2-day science program for students who are studying somewhere, doing their master's, doing their PhD in their field. 2 days a week, we ask them to be at our place and to be in a team. And we don't offer grading, we don't offer credit points, we don't offer a certificate, so it's completely valueless in the academic system. And still, hundreds of people are applying. Up to now, we couldn't believe it, actually, that they're doing this. And they are enjoying it. And we have 35 professors and assistants, so we have a strong teaching team, and they're all from different disciplines, and they're also part-time. We have a brilliant team of full-time people here. They do the administration. Petra, where's Petra? One of the people is here. Where are you? Oh, up there. So she's relationship management. And we have a huge teaching team. So just to give you an idea. And this is also changing, like our students, we are constantly changing the people, but we have a very experienced group of teachers now who used to be traditional teachers, sometimes used to be in the industry, but now they're trained to not to do the things what I'm doing. This is a traditional way. Professors and standing in front of a large group of people and giving a lecture. So we don't do this anymore. Because we think this time is maybe 20th century, maybe 19th century, but 21st century, we need something different. And we are experimenting with that. And we do this, like our friends at Stanford, we ask companies, institutions, large ones like the big car companies, Volkswagen, for example, small and medium-sized companies like Miele, Sennheiser, to give us their actual problem, their real problems. And this is the purpose where students get together. They're saying, oh, there's a real problem in the outside world. The institution has a problem. We have the chance to solve it in one semester. This is a big thing, so we do this. And we also ask smaller companies, NGOs, governmental institutions, and it's amazing, they're approaching us now because they know us as a kind of solving machine or solving institution for their problems. And they return. It's not that you just come once, and they pay. Actually, they pay a lot of money for every semester project, which is great. Students don't have to pay, just a little bit. But the companies are paying. So this was a portfolio of one of the former semesters. This is the current portfolio of the current semester. So every semester we have a completely new portfolio. We don't have any curriculum in a traditional sense. This is actually the curriculum. Learning and working is the same. We treat it as the same thing. You learn the best while you work. And you work the best while you're learning. And this is if you look at those, I just pick out, what should I pick out? The future of butchers. Butcher 2.0 in a world where everything is vegan, vegetarian. The German butchers, they get nervous. Yeah? They actually get nervous because they think maybe we have to rethink our whole business model, you know? We do another, and they approached us actually. And there's the Bundespolizei, the federal police, together with Frankfurt Airport and Lufthansa, they approached us about airport security control. After this German Wings disaster, you all know about, they're saying we have to do something. They were calling us out of a meeting of all the security experts of Germany. They were sitting together and they knew that we have a semester slots. They were actually calling us out of the meeting if there's a slot available. And so we started it last week. And there's another, let's look at that one. We got approached by the justice prize guys from the responsible person for all the prisons in Berlin. And they have an incredible question. They have the question, all over Europe, there's no place where any prisoner has access to internet. Is there a way for especially looking at the resocialization process at the end, after 5 years being in prison, does it make sense to keep those people completely away of a thing we're using all the time? Tricky question. These kind of questions are very, very interesting to us because at the first moment you think completely unsolvable or completely bullshit. So our students work on this. And this is the atmosphere we are in. And I added something after listening to so many talks, especially in the morning also. I added I needed to put in this thing because you might ask, what kind of companies are doing design thinking in Germany? And usually I used this as an example, BMW. Because if you look at the i8 and i3, those cars, in the middle of last year, I was approached by BMW. We were not involved. They didn't ask us to develop those. No, they did this internally as a design thinking process. And I'm allowed to say this, even if on their website, their communication, they don't use it. But actually, they did it. They put a design thinking team together for developing a completely new set of cars. Electrical car, completely sustainable. Every detail is rethought in a completely new way. Even the whole production line is completely new. But then I was reading about this car. And you might have seen that. And then something really strange happened. Because Google was, all of a sudden, they were showing this little ugly potato, which is a kind of three-dimensional version of the Android logo, on wheels, a self-driving car. But Google was known to be a company under S in the alphabet, like search engine, but not under A, like automobiles. And the whole German car industry was like scared. To the outside, they were saying, oh, no problem. The head of Daimler was saying, oh, no problem. We're very good friends with Google, and they're just the search engine guys. They're not too much. We're the car guys, you know. And but behind the scenes, you could actually see they were like shaking. And and then I found this nice little video, and you might have seen that. I just show some seconds to illustrate.
Today, we have
how
something
Google
extra
is
special
using
for
it,
you
how
guys.
doing
You
that.
guys will be some of the first people outside of our team and outside of Google to ever ride in it.
Oh, there it is. Oh, isn't that cute?
So just driving around. Kids were not allowed to drive.
All right, Connie, let's go.
Using it.
There's no steering wheel in the way.
It was a big decision for us
A
to
blind
go and
person.
start building our purpose-built vehicles for this. And really, they're prototype vehicles. They were a chance for us to explore what does it really mean to have a self-driving vehicle. But in the small amount of time we've been working on it, you know, we have.
So just stop that here, because we don't have too much time. I just want to illustrate, there's a search engine company, they do something else, but all of a sudden they found out it might be very interesting to build a car and to do a prototype. And they did this prototype, and no German car company would ever have shown this kind of prototype in the public. No, it's just too ugly, it's not finished, it's not the shiny thing. I had a chance after this presentation, after this video, which was shown, most of you have probably seen that. I got together, I was invited by Rupert Stadler, he's the head of Audi, the CEO of Audi. And we had a talk for half a day about big changes, transformation processes in large companies. And not just about new cars, but he was telling me very proud, that he's saying, I was asking him with the Google thing, is that scary to you? And he was saying, no. We have all this technology, everything is there, you know, and we just recently did an interesting thing. We showed that we proved that we can do that. And I show you.
Hello everybody, this is Audi Media TV from the Hockenheim Ring, Germany. Today Audi has sent this RS7 concept piloted driving out to the track with no driver behind the wheel at full racing speed, and everything worked out well, smoothly and fine. Audi has proved that this is the sportiest piloted driving car so far. Unfortunately, we've heard that our website was down for some time due to the unexpected high amount of users. We apologize for this technical problem, and that's why we would like to show you the highlights of our show run once again.
Once everything is safe, Bobby is absolutely away. The first piloted car here at the Hockenheim Ring with Audi. This RS7 accelerates now towards the Nord curve of turn 1. You can see that, look, it's being steered by nobody. It's being controlled by the intelligence. A great line through turn 1, heading up now towards turn 2. Just look at the speed.
Stop here. You could check it out on the internet. I looked at it and I listened to his story, and first of all, I thought, wow, what a great thing. He showed me the car. But then I started asking myself, there is no person in the car. Who is watching this? For whom is Audi designing this? And no one could answer me that question. It's not that I want to bash on the German car manufacturer, but it scared me to see that there is a huge company just being on a track for technology, completely losing the people like behind them. They're completely off. They're very proud that there's no person involved. How great is that? Do we like that? Probably not. No emotion involved. So, and this is what I see with a lot of big companies. They're in the same situation. They always do what they used to do for the last 50, 70 years, and they're very proud of what they can do. And look at those are project partners here from our side, student project partners. You see a lot of different companies. A lot of them have the same problem. They just lost the user. They lost the people, and they're now figuring out we have to find them back. And please help us. Please give us a chance. And design thinking is actually a very, very good approach to help them. So I think this thing I don't have to tell you. We are following the full focus on human values, not too much on technology, not too much on business. But I want to share one other. Does it work anymore? Yeah, it works. The 3 core elements. We have seen them at one of the slides, I think. I think it's very, very important. This is our basic set of design thinking. That's how we define design thinking. This is what, when I returned from Stanford at that time, I was doing some notes, and it was basically this. First thing, we don't focus too much anymore on the individual creative power. We focus on the creative power of teams, and this is why we don't grade. Because evaluation of a teamwork, or doing teamwork and evaluating single people, hurts the teamwork. So please don't do it. Second thing is we're using a process which is activating the full mental power the left part and the right part of the brain. This is very important because usually with our disciplines, we just cut out one part of the brain. We just forget about the rest. But all people, all students, all people are equipped with the full mental power, so we just have to use it. And this is what those 6 steps do. And the other thing is very important, is the space. And we shouldn't forget about this. Most of the companies and institutions we are involved with, they completely forget about it. Because they think, we have our buildings, we have our office spaces, and we just have to use them. What we have to do is we have to change them. We have to be mindful for all 3 of those, because those are the core defining elements of learning and also of working culture. The place, the process, and the people. And since we are living in times of significant changes, of incredible paradigm shifts, of global connectivity, of growing networks, of growing complexity, we have to tackle all 3 of those. This is why I call the dynamic triangle of design thinking. Because you cannot just take a picture and do it at home. You have to actually define it into your culture. Every company has to do that. Every institution has to do it. And it has to be developed further and further. And this is how we're doing this, how we are treating that. We constantly developing the space, constantly developing further the program, constantly looking, are we treating the teams right? Are we doing the right things? Actually, we had to develop our own furniture because we couldn't find it. We couldn't find team supporting furniture in a stand-up position, flexible enough so that team spaces can breathe, can be larger, smaller, as teams needs it. And this is part of the furniture. This furniture we did for ourselves. You find them now in more than 100 institutions in Germany. Completely unexpected, completely unintended. And another unintended impact you see here. I don't have the time to go through some of the projects. Just a quick glance of some of the projects with impact. But I want to show you this one, because this one was completely unexpected. This is a list, a summary, and it's not even complete. Peter was just telling me there are even 10 missing. This is the list of startups and spin-offs just falling out of our process. We didn't actively support this. We have constantly startups to be running, falling out of the design thinking process at our school, with 120 students representing more than 60 different disciplines, more than 50 universities, every semester new students, and they're actually activated to be entrepreneurs. And they're not entering the school as entrepreneurs. No, they get out of that in a completely different mode. And this is so important. Another unintended impact is that we see design thinking labs in Germany now all over the places. There's just a selection, but large companies are running this kind of things that they are asking us to help to establish those, like Deutsche Bank, DHL, since several years already, and they're further developing, and they have a hard time using it because it's so different to their normal corporate environment, but they're actually doing it. And so we started professional education, and actually through that program, we have 240 students a year running through our normal student program. This, also unintended, runs about 1,000 professionals who want to learn, and so we had to build up another entity, another company to follow this kind of needs. And I want to end with a glance here, and with a big thank you to all the community, especially to our French friends, to Véronique, and I'm really looking forward to a close cooperation in the future and to a great development here. Thanks a lot.
Some of you are still here. I'm amazed. First, I'd like to start by thanking Veronique and Catherine and her team for putting this on. On behalf of the speakers and as a member of the audience today, this was first class. You did a great job. I stand here today at a real crossroads in my life and my career. I started in academia, in academic leadership, about 25 years ago, 30 years ago. The University of Texas at Austin, I co-founded the design program there. It's a big research university. I went and I led Parsons School of Design in Manhattan. And now I'm a provost at Philadelphia University. And for those of you who don't know what a provost is in the United States, I had a parent tell me the other day that it sounded like a swift mammal. But a provost runs the academic side of the university, and the president runs the executive side of the university at many universities in the United States. But right now I'm switching, I'm moving into the private sector. And so this is a real moment, a poignant moment of reflection for me, to look back at that 25, 30 years, to look at where academia and universities are right now, and to think a little bit about leadership. My background is in design. I came from design into academic leadership, and that's how I view what I've done and where I'm going. So, there's a lot of talk about how universities are medieval in origin. What I'm going to talk about today is try to frame what a university is. So we don't just assume an image of a university as some sort of normative legacy thing. We've constructed universities, and we need to rethink what they are fundamentally. Yes, they're medieval in origin, but the roots of the modern university grow out of the Industrial Revolution. And in fact, during a 50-year period, most of what we understand today as university-ness came into being. Let's think about some of what happened during that period and how it's now been integrated into the frame of the university. Standardized grading. Standardized testing. Multiple choice tests. Come on, I got it. Knowledge compartmentalization in the form of disciplines and departments and so on and so forth. Professional disciplines such as law and medicine and business. Credits. All throughout the world, there's different credit systems. In the United States, it's the Carnegie Unit. Standardized curricula. Sequential, standardized curricula. All of that and much more constitutes university-ness to us. And they were remarkably powerful tools for progress during the industrial age, the late industrial age. But for a different society facing different problems that presented themselves at entirely different scales and were connected to vastly different social and economic structures. And today, I'm not going to spend a lot of time telling you how the world has changed. We've heard about that today. But we see the accelerating mobility of people and political ideology and goods and ideas, and my God, capital. You're surfing down capital now all over the world, completely fluid. And we have a situation now where we have these discipline-defined, massively networked global systems producing new classes of problems. And again, we've heard about this today. Global systems with staggering complexity. They produce these confounding, ambiguous problems. And that's almost a cliche to go through these now, but systemic economic fragility. In 2008, the whole world basically melted down because of the mortgage problem in the United States. And now we have the Greek economy kind of threatening to ripple through the European Union and perhaps through the rest of the world. These issues are now so systemic that we need to learn how to deal with them in new ways. Global climate change is another great example. But again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. So in response to this new world, a lot of questions are being raised about the value of the traditional university, and frankly, they should be raised. The 20th century university model is unbundling before our eyes right now. And as I said, it should unbundle. We have not progressed in this way that we should over the last 20 or 30 years. Now, if you think about that grid as the coherent 20th century industrial model of the university, as the cohesion weakens that brought that model together, and the value propositions which gave it that coherence, we see the emergence of what I will call fragments. So we have the weakening cohesion, and now we can see under the fog of that vision of the normative university, the pieces of the university as fragments. And let's identify those fragments. These are very small, so I'll read them out for you. Unbundling of the instructor's role. We have so much discussion today about the new role of the professor, no longer the sage on the stage, a mentor, a co-creator, and so on. We have the unbundling of disciplinary cohesion. I am tired of disciplines. And I can say this stuff now that I'm leaving, right? I'm just tired of them. The reason I like them as an administrator is because they're easy to budget. But that's about it. But disciplinary cohesion is being called into question. How many times did you hear transdisciplinary today? The term transdisciplinarity. Unbundling of the monolithic credential. A BA, an MA, a doctoral degree, what do they really mean today? They're being called into question. No longer can you look at a degree like that, a normative thing, and if you're a company or you're a graduate, you're running a graduate program, you can't assume that degree has inherent value in it the way that you might have 30 or 40 years ago. And so now there's challenges to the traditional degree in the form of what you might call stackable credentials that you earn as badges as you move through your curriculum. Those credentials then are put onto your transcript and tell a story about where you've been. That's the future. The future is not about these monolithic degrees anymore. Unbundling of the financial model. In the United States, schools like ours are tuition-driven. There'll be many mergers, many bankruptcies. It's already happening everywhere. I can tell you at our school, we are approached every month, silently and secretly, from other universities wanting to merge with us because of the financial pressures. In Europe and elsewhere, this is happening mostly in the form of mergers. And then unbundling of the traditional package of pedagogies. We hear a lot about flipped classrooms and new form studio-based science and so on and so forth. And then unbundling of the boundaries around student experience. No longer is the student experience contained within the boundaries of the university itself. So we don't know exactly what the model of the future university will be, but we can begin to take some educated guesses. The emerging model is what I'll think of as what we can think of as an unbundled university. It embraces the complexity and the systemic nature of the problems that I've discussed by organizing itself around problem-based transdisciplinary teaching and learning, explicitly building curricula around collaborative learning experience and positioning itself as a hub in a network of knowledge sources. The unbundled university leverages the fact that knowledge is a commodity, that content delivery is no longer its major role, and the value it adds is about teaching students to critically evaluate information, synthesize it into knowledge, and apply it to specific contexts that are often complex and ambiguous. Daphne Kohler, who founded and runs Coursera, was at a conference at the University of Pennsylvania on MOOCs. And she was talking about MOOCs, and the audience was full of provosts and academic presidents. And someone raised their hand and said, "Should we be afraid of MOOCs?" And Daphne Kohler, with just absolutely a straight face, said, "The only institutions that should be afraid of MOOCs are those specializing in content delivery." And I'll tell you, it sent a shiver through the room. So, I'm here because I'm a provost of Philadelphia University. That's my office building. And Philadelphia University, for a variety of reasons, is a place that was ready to change. And I'm not going to go into why or how, but for historical reasons, it was positioned at a particular moment 6, 7 years ago where a bunch of leadership could kind of swoop in and work with the community there and do things that I don't think we could have done anywhere else. It was a university that was, as I forgot the writer's name, The Innovative University, the book. It was suffering from what most colleges and universities in the United States are suffering from, that is what was termed Harvard envy. Sorry if I was. And that is this kind of normative notion of what a university is. So we're going to have like a prestigious looking lawn, and we're going to have a fountain, and we have to have these benches. Students are going to sit around and they're going to read on the grass, and everything is going to be great, and we're going to just kind of have these disciplines, and students are going to come, and it's going to be prestigious and great. But the environment that Philadelphia University was in was fundamentally changing. And as we saw, the problems that its graduates needed to address were fundamentally different. And thank God the financial crisis hit just at the right time that we could kind of roll the dice, if you will. We could say we're entering this turbulent period and we don't have a huge endowment. We need to radically differentiate. And we knew from lots of research that we had done in talking with graduate programs and employers and other universities and students and faculty that a whole new kind of education was necessary for our graduates in order to address the problems when they graduated. So we have a dynamic, turbulent environment, and we have, yes, there we go, got it. So what we wanted to do was to redesign the university structure to encourage flexibility and adaptability. There are 3 kinds of universities in the United States right now. Those that are elitely endowed, those that are at risk, and those that are flexible and nimble. And we are not elitely endowed. And then build innovation into the shared governance system. The shared governance system is the constitution which arranges the relationships between the faculty and the administration. So we wanted to redesign the entire university around new concepts of teaching and learning and new skills for graduates. Now, I'm just going to go through a few things that we learned here. And I can't go into great detail about every aspect of this, but suffice it to say that this was pretty radically student-centered, user-centered. We were talking to students and we were talking to faculty. We were also constantly consulting with other universities, user groups constantly in order to develop our plan. But lesson 1 is that I learned was build infusions of knowledge into the system that you're trying to change. So the unbundled university that's emerging now and the model that we're moving toward is constantly asking questions about how it adds value. It doesn't assume it's adding value. It asks questions about how it can add value and what kind of value it adds. It does this by reimagining and redesigning the system itself in which value is created. So you have to reframe fundamentally what the university is. Oh, there's Banny. So homage to Banny. We had Banny in, and we had many workshops over the first 2 years I was there, bringing in infusions of knowledge from the outside. The Provost's office created something called the Transformation Imperative, and that was had 2 meanings. One, we needed to change internally, and second, higher education as a system needed to change. And so we brought in experts from all over the world to do workshops, to lecture, to work with our faculty and students on all these different facets of change. How we can think about new technological infrastructures, how we can think about new spaces and new kinds of teaching, new kinds of credentials. And we've institutionalized that now so it occurs constantly, all the time, every year. That outside knowledge is is expected now by our faculty and students. It's always part of their experience of working, if you're a faculty member, at the university. Because institutional knowledge is insufficient when you're in a situation like we're in right now with higher education. You can't expect to change the system if you're just looking to it on the inside. You need that outside infusion of knowledge. Find thought leaders. So the sector can't provide all the solutions or even identify all of the opportunities. Lesson 2. And you've heard this all day today. I was really happy to see all the different ways people talked about prototyping. Constantly identify prototyping opportunities. And don't assume that you have to create prototypes. They're kind of all over the place, I think. You just have to identify. A prototype is anything that works as a prototype, right? So an org chart, I'll talk about in a minute. An org chart can be an amazing prototype if you use it right. Build to think rather than discuss, analyze, or hypothesize in abstract terms before acting, because you have to build in a situation like us. You have to design and concretize ideas and have people respond to them, because again, you can't look to the inside necessarily for ideas. You need to concretize things and respond to them. It's a totally different way of thinking. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about Philadelphia University. So we did a strategic planning process, and guess what? Everybody said, you know what? We should be innovative. What the hell does innovation mean? I mean, you know, it means nothing at this point, right? It means everything and nothing. And so, you know, how do you take an idea like innovation and make it real? So when the community came to us, the president and I, and said, we want to be innovative, we're like, great, let's achieve innovation by building something together. And we decided we would create something called the College of Design, Engineering, and Commerce. And I can't remember why we didn't say Design, Engineering, and Business. They didn't like the acronym DEB or something. But Design, Engineering, and Commerce would bring 16 majors together and encompass over half of this population in our university. So we had this tacit idea of being innovative, and we tried to make it concrete by creating something together, the College of Design, Engineering, and Commerce. And as we were making the college, we were having charrettes, we were prototyping pedagogies, we were prototyping spaces, we were prototyping new ways of faculty working together. We were constantly prototyping, and as we were moving through this process, we were using action research, which is a form of research that goes out into the community that's being affected, essentially, and you're consulting with them, you're learning from them as they're responding to the change. And these bars, I mean, this is one instrument that we use. Sitting down and having coffee with people works too, let me tell you. Or you could also do ethnographic research. But this particular instrument, you see these bars, and these bars are measuring across a number of variables different perceptions of change. For example, is it 1 minute? 5 minutes? Okay. Okay. And so we created this, based on that original research, we learned that the building, we understood that people were ahead of us. We thought we were ahead of them. And that we needed somehow to bring them together around this concrete idea of the college. And so we decided to accelerate the building of a building by 1.5 years because it was a prototype that we could use to bring the community together. We couldn't build a building unless we knew how to create the curriculum. We couldn't create the curriculum, really, also without the building, because the two things work together. And I can tell you, building that building 1.5 years early was the best thing that we ever did. Lesson 4, use co-creation. We've heard that today too, to foster cultures of change. I'm not going to go too deeply into the academic growth plan, but it was a way of bringing the entire university together each year, and we still do it, to look at our entire academic program, how the individual programs fit together, how they complement each other, how they don't, where are the programs weak, where are they strong, And we look at everything together, and we develop new programming based on that co-creative work we do each year. And then create prototyping chains. And I just want to quickly mention that, so we created the College of Design, Engineering, and Commerce, but that just became a prototype. So the college became a prototype for the entire university. We said, well, that worked pretty well. So let's create two more colleges that all are matrixed and work together. And so we essentially created an entire new university based on the prototype of the College of Design, Engineering, and Commerce. And now the entire university itself, again, matrixed together, is a kind of change machine, all based on design thinking and all driving design thinking. And I'm not going to go into great detail here, but essentially what happens, move forward here. Lesson 4, decide what matters most and build it into the system. Collaboration and teamwork are tremendously important. We wanted to design that into the very essence of who we were. Normally, you start at the freshman year as students are entering the system, and they're broad. As they begin to graduate, as they get to graduation, their academic experience narrows and they specialize. And then typically, they'll graduate, and then typically they create these traditional collaborative courses that happen during the junior and the senior year. But what happens? You have these gaps that form. And the gaps are tremendous problems. There are cultural issues that get started between the disciplines during those gap years. Students don't know how to work together. So we built into the system collaboration and teamwork from the moment the student enters the university. And I'm not going to go into great detail here with this diagram. But what this diagram is essentially saying is, by using prototyping chains, we applied one lesson to another lesson, and we essentially built a system that is self-reinforcing at this point. And the system now, it's really interesting. We hit a tipping point, I think, about last year. The system now produces really interesting academic programming on its own. I don't really have to do anything as provost anymore. The faculty runs the system, and the system is designed in such a way that it kind of generates its own change and has generated its own logic. And so I guess my message to you is that change can occur, even in something as path-dependent as a university. It can occur, and it must occur. So what's next for us? Well, we've been very internally focused. And I think what's next for us is to take what we have learned from creating the university from the inside and use it to build partnerships within a distributed network, a new kind of network of innovation-driven universities around the world. In fact, a network very much like the one Veronique and the Paris D.school is involved in creating now. Again, thank you very much.
Ça va être très très court. Je voulais remercier la qualité exceptionnelle des interventions aujourd'hui. Merci infiniment à tous les speakers. Ça a vraiment été un moment très enrichissant, je trouve, et ils ont eu une qualité en fait de présentation, une qualité de discours, une qualité de contenu. Et je crois qu'on peut encore les remercier parce que vraiment, c'était vraiment fantastique. Très modestement, j'espère que vous avez été inspirés, que vous vous souviendrez en fait de cette journée, et même si c'est vrai que ce n'est pas un format typiquement design thinking parce que vous êtes assis et que vous écoutez, je pense que c'était intéressant aussi de voir que tous ces speakers sont, pour moi, ils avaient en fait vraiment des histoires à raconter qui étaient de réalisation. Donc j'espère que vous êtes inspirés par cet état d'esprit de finalement d'être des explorateurs des temps modernes. J'appelle ça vraiment explorateurs des temps modernes. Donc si vous l'êtes, n'hésitez pas à revenir. N'hésitez pas donc à venir nous raconter vos aventures, vos histoires, vos voyages. On ne le refera pas en fait tous les mois, mais on recommencera en fait une telle session. Et donc si vous avez des belles histoires aussi à raconter, ça sera avec plaisir. Et rejoignez en fait la communauté de Paris d.school. On vous tiendra informé de tous nos événements. En tout cas, je vous souhaite un excellent voyage d'exploration avec vous-même et avec votre équipe. Vous êtes tous invités au cocktail qui a lieu au studio, donc au 3e étage quand vous sortez à gauche. Et puis, je vous donne aussi rendez-vous à notre prochain événement qui aura lieu le 19 juin. C'est donc tous les élèves de Paris d.school qui vont présenter leurs différents projets. Alors, on les a mis sous pression parce que l'année dernière, il y avait 100% de réalisation dans 100% des projets des étudiants. Cette année, on va annoncer aussi une très grande étape pour nous à Paris d.school pour le 19 juin, à savoir, on va créer un club des révélateurs de talents, parce qu'on veut véritablement transformer la Cité des Cartes. On veut véritablement, si vous voulez, que tous les projets d'élèves trouvent leur réalisation et qu'on puisse ensuite vivre l'expérience de ces projets sur le campus à Paris d.school. Et donc ça va être le grand manifesto pour le 19 juin, auquel vous êtes tous invités. Et on espère vous voir nombreux, parce que les étudiants, et quand on est un explorateur, quand on commence à avoir des idées, qu'on croit à quelque chose, ils ont véritablement besoin qu'on continue à jouer les bonnes fées avec eux, qu'on dise qu'on croit en eux. Et ça, c'est vraiment très très important pour cristalliser ces germes d'entrepreneurs, ces entrepreneurs en herbe, comme on dit en français. Et c'est vraiment très très important que vous veniez et que vous leur disiez que vous croyez en eux et que ce qu'ils font, c'est vraiment super. Et vous verrez, en plus, c'est vraiment super. Il y a des très 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 belles histoires. Ils vont très très loin dans leur réalisation, mais on a vraiment besoin de vous pour continuer à vivre cette communauté et à ce qu'ils prennent confiance en eux, qu'ils ont tout le potentiel de pouvoir réaliser et que c'est ça qui est le plus important. Donc, et merci infiniment d'avoir été parmi nous aujourd'hui.